Welcome to Glass Onion Secrets, where mysteries unravel and secrets come to light. In what Benoit Blanc knows about solving clues will blow your mind. Seymour, join Detective Benoit Blanc as he tackles the theft of the Star of Midnight at Blackthorn Manor. With cunning clues and a family full of suspects, this suspenseful tale will keep you guessing. Hit that subscribe button and let's dive into the mystery. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Heirloom. The storm came first, a howling beast that clawed at the cliffs of Blackthorn Manor. Rain lashed the ancient stone walls, and lightning split the sky, casting jagged shadows through the tall, arched windows of the grand estate. Nestled on a jagged promontory overlooking the churning Atlantic, the manor stood like a sentinel, its turrets defiant against the tempest. Inside, however, the air was thick with a different kind of tension, one not born of nature, but of human secrets. It was the night of the annual Blackthorn Gala, a tradition as old as the manor itself. For over a century, the Blackthorn family had hosted this lavish affair, inviting the elite of New England society to bask in their wealth and prestige. The gala was a spectacle of opulence, crystal chandeliers glittering like frozen starlight, tables groaning under the weight of caviar and champagne, and a string quartet weaving melodies that floated through the air like silk. But beneath the polished surface, whispers of scandal and rivalry simmered. Tonight, those whispers would erupt into something far more sinister. The centerpiece of the gala, as always, was the Blackthorn heirloom, a sapphire necklace known as the Star of Midnight. Its central gem, a deep blue stone the size of a robin's egg, was said to hold a curse. Whoever wore it would know great fortune, but only until the sapphire deemed them unworthy. Then calamity would follow. The necklace, passed down through generations, was more than a jewel. It was a symbol of the Blackthorn legacy, a tangible link to their storied past. Tonight, it rested in a velvet-lined case on a pedestal in the manor's grand ballroom, its facets catching the light like a captive galaxy. Guests stole glances at it, their eyes gleaming with awe, and in some cases something darker. Eleanor Blackthorn, the family's matriarch, presided over the gala with the grace of a queen. At 72, she was a striking figure, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her emerald gown shimmering with every step. Her eyes, sharp as cut glass, missed nothing. She moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with senators, heiresses, and artists. Her smile, a perfect mask, but those who knew her best, her family, her closest confidants, could see the strain beneath it. Eleanor was guarding something, and it wasn't just the necklace. The ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and gowns, the air heavy with perfume and ambition. Waiters glided through the crowd, offering flutes of champagne that sparkled like liquid gold. The quartet played a waltz, and couples swayed on the polished oak floor, their laughter mingling with the clink of glasses. Yet, for all its grandeur, the room felt alive with undercurrents. Eyes darted, whispers passed behind gloved hands, and smiles tightened at the edges. The Blackthorns were a family of secrets, and tonight those secrets were restless. At the heart of the family was Eleanor's son, Theodore Blackthorn, a man whose charm was as polished as the manor's silver. At 45, Theodore cut a dashing figure in his tailored tuxedo. his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. He was the heir apparent, the one destined to carry the Blackthorn name into the future. But his easy smile hid a restless ambition, a hunger for something more than the legacy he'd been handed. Theodore worked the room with practiced ease, shaking hands and trading jokes, but his eyes kept flicking to the Star of Midnight. Was it pride in his family's treasure, or something else? Beside him was his wife, Cassandra, a former actress, whose beauty still turned heads. Her golden hair cascaded in waves, and her crimson gown hugged her figure like a second skin. Cassandra was a master of reinvention, having traded the spotlight of Hollywood for the gilded cage of Blackthorn Manor. She laughed at Theodore's jokes, her hand resting lightly on his arm, but her gaze was distant, as if she were playing a role she'd grown tired of. The other guests watched her, some with admiration, others with envy. Cassandra was a Blackthorn by marriage, but she'd never fully been accepted by the family, a fact she wore like a subtle wound. Then there was Julian Blackthorn, Eleanor's younger son, who stood apart from the crowd, nursing a whiskey near the fireplace. At 38, Julian was the family's black sheep, a poet and dreamer whose disdain for the Blackthorn legacy was no secret. His dark eyes smouldered with quiet intensity, and his rumpled suit stood out against the pristine elegance of the gala. Julian had returned to the manor only at his mother's insistence, and he made no effort to hide his discomfort. He watched the Star of Midnight with a strange expression, part fascination, part contempt, as if it were both a treasure and a shackle. The younger generation was represented by Beatrice Blackthorn, Theodore's daughter, a 22-year-old art student with a rebellious streak. Beatrice had inherited her grandmother's sharp eyes and her father's charisma, but she wore her privilege like an ill-fitting dress. Her black velvet gown was adorned with silver pins shaped like crescent moons, a nod to her love of the unconventional. She flitted through the crowd, her laughter bright but brittle, as if she were trying to outrun something. Beatrice had grown up in the shadow of the Star of Midnight, and tonight she seemed almost defiant in its presence, as if daring it to live up to its curse. The final Blackthorn in attendance was Margaret, Eleanor's sister-in-law, a widow who lived on the fringes of the family. At 65, Margaret was a quiet, unassuming figure, her grey hair pulled into a severe bun, her navy dress devoid of ornamentation. She hovered near the edges of the ballroom, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes darting between the necklace and the guests. Margaret was the keeper of the family's history, the one who knew the stories behind every heirloom, every scandal. But tonight she seemed nervous, her usual composure frayed at the edges. Beyond the Blackthorns, the gala was a who's who of New England's elite. There was Senator Harold Grayson, a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh and a reputation for ruthless deal-making. His wife, Lydia, clung to his arm, her diamond earrings glinting as she scanned the room for gossip. There was Vivienne Dubois, a French art dealer whose sly smile suggested she knew more than she let on. And there was Dr. Samuel Klein, a historian, obsessed with the Blackthorn legacy, his notebook filled with scribbled theories about the Star of Midnight's origins. Each guest brought their own agenda, their own reasons for coveting the necklace, or fearing it. As the clock neared midnight, the storm outside grew fiercer, rattling the windows and sending a chill through the ballroom. The quartet paused, and Eleanor stepped onto a small dais, her presence commanding silence. The guests turned to face her, their faces a mix of anticipation and curiosity. Eleanor's voice, clear and resonant, cut through the hum of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her smile radiant but guarded, "tonight we celebrate not just tradition, but legacy. The Star of Midnight is more than a jewel. It is the heart of the Blackthorn family, a testament to our resilience and our history. As is our custom, I invite you to join me in raising a glass to its enduring light." The guests applauded, their glasses catching the chandelier's glow as they toasted. Eleanor's eyes lingered on the necklace, and for a moment her smile faltered. It was a fleeting crack in her composure, unnoticed by most, but not by everyone. Beatrice, standing near the back, tilted her head, her brow furrowing. Julian, by the fireplace, tightened his grip on his glass. And Margaret, in the shadows, pressed a hand to her chest, as if steadying her breath. The quartet resumed, and the gala returned to its rhythm. Couples danced, conversations buzzed, and the Star of Midnight gleamed on its pedestal, a silent sentinel. But as the minutes ticked by, a strange unease began to creep through the room. It was subtle at first, a guest glancing over their shoulder, a waiter pausing mid-step, a laugh that cut off too quickly. The storm's roar seemed to amplify it, as if the manor itself were holding its breath. Then, at precisely 12:03 a.m., it happened. A scream pierced the air, sharp and raw, shattering the elegance of the gala. The music stopped abruptly, the violinist's bows frozen in mid-stroke. All eyes turned to the pedestal where the Star of Midnight had been displayed. The velvet case was open, its lid tilted at an odd angle. And the necklace, the priceless, cursed, irreplaceable Star of Midnight, was gone. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a cacophony of voices. "It's stolen!" cried Lydia Grayson, her hand clutching her pearls. "Impossible!" bellowed Senator Grayson, his face reddening. Viviane Dubois raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a faint smirk. Dr. Klein fumbled with his notebook, muttering about historical precedents. The Blackthorns, however, stood frozen, their faces a gallery of shock, anger, and something deeper, fear. Eleanor was the first to move. She stepped toward the pedestal, her gown sweeping the floor, her expression unreadable. She examined the empty case, her fingers hovering over the velvet, as if expecting the necklace to reappear. Then, slowly, she turned to face the crowd, her eyes blazing with a quiet fury. "Someone in this room," she said, her voice low but carrying the weight of a gavel, "has taken the Star of Midnight, and I promise you they will not leave this manor until it is found." The words hung in the air, heavy as the storm outside. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier merriment replaced by suspicion. Theodore stepped forward, his jaw tight, his charm replaced by a steely resolve. "Mother, we need to search everyone," he said, his voice clipped. "No one leaves until we check bags, pockets, everything." Cassandra touched his arm, her voice soft but firm. "Theodore, think. A search will cause panic. We need to be strategic." Her eyes flicked to the crowd, as if already sizing up suspects. Julian, still by the fireplace, let out a dry laugh. Strategic? The damn thing's gone, Cassie. Maybe it's the curse finally cashing in. His words were flippant, but his knuckles were white around his glass. Beatrice pushed through the crowd, her face pale but her voice sharp. This is ridiculous. The necklace was right there 10 minutes ago. Someone must have seen something. She turned to the guests, her gaze accusing. Who was near the pedestal? Margaret, trembling slightly, stepped forward. I was close by, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't see anything, I swear. Her eyes darted to Eleanor, pleading for belief. The room erupted into chaos. Accusations flew, voices overlapping. Senator Grayson demanded the police be called, while Lydia insisted it was an inside job. Vivienne Dubois offered to help search, her tone suspiciously eager. Dr. Klein rambled about a similar theft in 1897, earning glares from those around him. The waiters huddled near the doors, unsure whether to intervene or flee. And through it all, the storm raged, its thunder shaking the manor's foundations. Eleanor raised a hand, silencing the crowd. Enough, she said, her voice cutting through the din like a blade. We will not descend into madness. The Star of Midnight is more than a jewel. It is our history, our blood. Whoever took it will face consequences, but we will handle this with dignity. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, lingering on each face as if peering into their souls. I have already sent for someone who can help us, she continued. A man whose reputation precedes him, whose mind is sharper than any blade. By morning he will be here, and he will find the truth, the guests murmured, curiosity mingling with their unease. Who was this mysterious figure? A detective? A private investigator? Someone with the skill to unravel a theft committed in a locked ballroom under the noses of 100 witnesses? Eleanor's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. His name, she said, is Benoit Blanc. The name landed like a spark in dry grass, igniting whispers. Benoit Blanc. The detective whose cases were the stuff of legend, whose wit and charm were as disarming as his intellect was formidable. If anyone could crack this mystery, it was him. But for now, the guests were trapped, the storm sealing them inside the manor like pieces on a chessboard, and somewhere among them, the thief waited, the Star of Midnight hidden in their grasp. As the clock struck 12:30 a.m., the ballroom remained frozen in a tableau of suspicion. The empty case stood as a silent accusation, its velvet lining mocking, the blackthorn's pride. The storm howled, the wind carrying a promise of secrets yet to be uncovered. And in the shadows, the first clue, a faint smudge of wax on the pedestal's base, went unnoticed, waiting for a mind like Blanc's to see it for what it was. The gala was over. The game had begun. Chapter 2. Enter Benoit Blanc. The storm had not relented. If anything, it had grown fiercer, as if the heavens themselves were conspiring to keep Blackthorn Manor sealed from the world. Dawn broke reluctantly, a grey smear of light that barely pierced the roiling clouds. The Atlantic churned below the cliffs, its waves crashing against the rocks with a rhythm that echoed the unease within the manor's ancient walls. Inside, the grandeur of the previous night's gala had curdled into something sour. The ballroom, once alive with music and laughter, now felt like a gilded cage, its chandeliers dimmed, its tables cluttered with half-empty glasses and wilted flowers. The guests, still clad in their finery, milled about in restless knots, their faces etched with exhaustion and suspicion. The star of midnight was gone, and with it the illusion of civility. Eleanor Blackthorne stood at the centre of it all, a pillar of resolve amidst the chaos. Her emerald gown was slightly creased, her silver hair less pristine than the night before, but her authority was undiminished. She had ordered the manor's doors locked, the staff stationed at every exit, and the guests confined to the ballroom and adjacent parlours until help arrived. Her announcement of Benoit Blanc's impending arrival had quelled some of the panic, but it had also sharpened the tension. Whispers circulated like smoke. Who was this detective? Could he really find the thief? And what secrets might he uncover in the process? Theodore paced near the empty pedestal, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up as if preparing for a fight. "This is absurd," he muttered, his voice tight with frustration. "We're prisoners in our own home, Mother. We should be searching bags, interrogating the staff, not waiting for some outsider to swoop in." Cassandra, seated on a velvet chaise, crossed her arms, her crimson gown pooling around her like spilled wine. "And alienate everyone? Theodore, half these people could ruin us with a single phone call. We need finesse, not a sledgehammer." Her tone was calm, but her eyes flicked to the crowd, calculating, as if already sifting through suspects. Julian, leaning against a marble column, snorted softly. "Finesse? That's rich, Cassie. The necklace is gone, and we're all playing. Pretend while the thief laughs." He took a sip of whiskey, his third since midnight, and fixed his gaze on the storm-lashed windows. Maybe it's better this way. Let the damn thing stay lost. Beatrice, perched on the edge of a table, rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, Uncle Julian. You're not nearly as aloof as you think. You were staring at the necklace all night." Her voice was sharp, but there was a tremor in it, a crack in her usual bravado. She glanced at the pedestal, her fingers twisting one of her crescent moon pins. Margaret, standing quietly near a bookcase, clutched a lace handkerchief, her face pale. "We mustn't jump to conclusions," she said, her voice barely audible. "The star of midnight. It's more than a jewel. It's our history. Whoever took it, they don't understand what they've done." Her eyes darted to Eleanor, seeking reassurance, but Eleanor's attention was elsewhere. The guests were no less agitated. Senator Harold Grayson bellowed about lawsuits, his wife Lydia shushing him while scanning the room for allies. Viviane Dubois, the French art dealer, sipped champagne with an air of detached amusement, as if the theft were a performance she was critiquing. Dr. Samuel Klein scribbled furiously in his notebook, muttering about historical parallels to the theft of the Hope Diamond. The waiters, confined to a corner under the watchful eye of the butler, whispered among themselves, their faces a mix of fear and indignation. And through it all, the storm raged, its thunder rattling the manor's bones. At precisely 7:42 a.m., a new sound cut through the din. A sharp, deliberate knock at the manor's front doors. It was not the tentative rap of a stranded guest, or the frantic pounding of someone seeking shelter. It was confident, measured, almost musical, as if announcing the arrival of a long-awaited guest. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward the grand foyer beyond the ballroom, Eleanor straightened, her expression unreadable. "That will be him," she said simply, and strode toward the foyer, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Theodore followed, his jaw set, while Cassandra rose gracefully, her curiosity thinly veiled. Beatrice hopped off the table, her eyes bright with anticipation, and even Julian pushed off the column, trailing behind with a reluctant smirk. The guests parted like a sea, their murmurs rising as Eleanor reached the doors. The butler, a stooped man named Clarence, hesitated before unlatching the heavy oak panels. The wind howled as the doors swung open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the storm. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tweed suit, the colour of autumn leaves. A cream scarf draped loosely around his neck. A fedora sat at a jaunty angle on his head, its brim glistening with rain. In one hand he held a leather satchel, its surface worn but polished. In the other, a cigarette, unlit, twirled between his fingers like a conductor's baton. The storm seemed to frame him, the lightning casting his shadow long and dramatic across the foyer. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice a warm southern drawl that carried the cadence of a storyteller, "I am Benoit Blanc, and I do believe you all have a mystery on your hands." The words landed with the weight of a curtain rising on a stage. Blanc stepped inside, his polished loafers leaving faint wet prints on the marble. He removed his fedora, revealing a shock of silver-blonde hair and a pair of piercing blue eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His smile was disarming, almost boyish, but there was a sharpness beneath it, a mind already turning like a well-oiled machine. The guests stared, some with awe, others with wariness, as Clarence closed the doors, shutting out the storm. Eleanor extended a hand, her composure regal but strained. "Mr. Blanc, thank you for coming on such short notice. I trust you've been briefed?" Blanc took her hand, his grip firm but gentle, and inclined his head. "Ma'am, your telegram was as concise as it was urgent. A sapphire necklace, the Star of Midnight, vanished from a locked ballroom during a gala. No one in, no one out, and a room full of suspects with more motives than a Shakespearean tragedy. That about sum it up." Eleanor's lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile. "You have a way with words, Mr. Blanc. Yes, that's the gist of it. The necklace is irreplaceable, not just for its value, but for what it represents. We need it found, and the thief exposed." Blanc nodded, his eyes scanning the foyer and beyond, taking in the opulent decor, the gilded mirrors, the ancestral portraits, the faint scent of wax and roses. "Well then," he said, his drawl laced with anticipation, "let's not keep the truth waiting, shall we?" He moved toward the ballroom, his gait unhurried but purposeful, like a man who knew exactly where he was going. The Blackthorns and guests trailed behind, a procession of curiosity and dread. As Blanc entered the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted, as if his presence had altered the room's gravity. The empty pedestal stood at the centre, its velvet case a silent accusation. Blanc paused before it, his head tilted, his cigarette now tucked behind his ear. He didn't touch the case, didn't kneel to inspect it. He simply looked, his eyes narrowing as if seeing something no one else could. "Well now," he murmured, almost to himself. "Ain't that a curious thing?" Theodore, unable to contain himself, stepped forward. What's curious? It's an empty case. The necklace was stolen, probably by someone who slipped it into a pocket and is laughing at us right now." Blanc turned, his smile polite but faintly amused. "Oh, I don't doubt someone's laughing, Mr. Blackthorne. But pockets? Too simple. This ain't a smash and grab at a county fair. This is a performance, a sleight of hand executed under 100 pairs of eyes. And that, sir, takes audacity." Theodore bristled, but Cassandra interjected, her voice smooth. "Mr. Blanc, you're saying the thief planned this meticulously, that it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act?" Blanc's eyes met hers, and for a moment they seemed to lock in a silent conversation. "Mrs. Blackthorne, I'd wager my favourite scarf that this was planned down to the second. The storm, the gala, the necklace on display. Someone saw an opportunity and choreographed it like a damn ballet. The question is, who's the dancer?" Beatrice, hovering nearby, crossed her arms. "So what? You're just going to stand there and philosophise? Shouldn't you be dusting for fingerprints or something?" Blanc chuckled, a low, warm sound that seemed to ease the room's tension. "Miss Blackthorne, fingerprints are fine for the police, but they're like reading the last page of a novel first. I prefer to start with the story itself. And this story," he gestured to the pedestal, the crowd, the manor, "is already talking." Julian, still clutching his whiskey, raised an eyebrow. "Talking? It's a crime scene, not a poetry. Reading. What's it saying?" Blanc's smile widened, but his eyes were sharp, almost predatory. "It's saying plenty, Mr. Blackthorne. For one, it's saying that pedestal wasn't tampered with. No scratches, no pry marks. The case was opened clean, which means either a key or a mighty steady hand. For another, it's saying nobody panicked when the theft was discovered. Y'all were shocked, sure, but nobody bolted for the doors. That's interesting." The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to one another. Senator Grayson cleared his throat. "Are you suggesting we're all suspects, Mr. Blanc? That's preposterous. I'm a United States Senator." Blanc turned to him, his expression genial but unyielding. "Senator, in a room like this, everyone's a suspect until they ain't. That's not an accusation. It's just math. One of y'all took that necklace, and I intend to find out who. But don't worry, I'm a gentleman about it. Lydia." Grayson clutched her husband's arm, her voice shrill. "This is outrageous. We're being treated like criminals." Viviane Dubois, leaning against a table, let out a soft laugh. "Oh, come now, Lydia. It's rather exciting, no? A real-life mystery with a detective straight out of a novel. I, for one, can't wait to see how it unfolds." Her accent was lilting, but her eyes were cold, assessing Blanc as if he were a rival player in a game. Dr. Klein, adjusting his glasses, raised a hand. "Mr. Blanc, if I may, historically, thefts of this nature often involve misdirection. The Star of Midnight's curse, for instance, could be a psychological tool to distract from the real motive. Have you considered that?" Blanc nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Dr. Klein, I've considered a great many things, including that curse you'll keep whispering about. But curses don't pick locks or slip jewels into hiding spots. People do, and people, in my experience, are far more predictable than they think." He turned back to the pedestal, crouching now to examine it more closely. His fingers hovered over the velvet, not touching, his eyes tracing the edges of the case. Then, Almost imperceptibly, his brow furrowed. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, his drawl softening. "That's a mighty fine detail." Eleanor, watching him intently, stepped closer. "What do you see, Mr. Blanc?" Blanc stood, brushing off his knees, and flashed her a cryptic smile. "Something that don't belong, ma'am. A smudge, wax maybe, or something like it, right on the pedestal's base. It's faint, but it's there. Now, why would a thief leave a mark like that? Carelessness, or something else?" The room buzzed with murmurs, the guests craning to see the pedestal. Theodore scoffed. "A smudge? That could be from anything. Spilled champagne, a clumsy waiter." Blanc tilted his head, his eyes glinting. "Could be. But in my line of work, Mr. Blackthorne, there's no such thing as just a smudge. Every mark's a word in the story, and this one's whispering something curious." Cassandra raised an eyebrow. "And what's it whispering, Mr. Blanc?" Blanc's smile was enigmatic, almost playful. "Patience, Mrs. Blackthorne. The story's just getting started." He turned to the crowd, clapping his hands once, the sound sharp and commanding. "All right, folks, here's how this is gonna go. I need you all to stay put, keep your hands where I can see 'em, and try not to trample any evidence. I'm gonna take a little stroll through this fine manor, get a feel for the place. Clarence, my good man." He nodded to the butler. "Mind showing me the lay of the land?" Clarence, startled, nodded stiffly. "Of course, sir. This way." As Blanc moved to follow, he paused, glancing back at the Blackthorns. "One more thing," he said, his voice casual but laced with steel. "Whoever took that necklace is in this room, and I promise you, they're already feeling the heat. So, if you're thinking of slipping away or hiding that sapphire somewhere clever, don't. I'll find it, and I'll find you." The words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. The guests froze, their faces a gallery of fear, defiance, and calculation. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Theodore's jaw tightened. Cassandra's lips parted slightly. Beatrice's fingers stilled on her pin. Julian's smirk faded, and Margaret's handkerchief twisted into a knot. Even the non-Blackthorns, Grayson, Lydia, Vivian Klein, seemed to hold their breath, as if Blanc's gaze could pierce their secrets. Blanc tipped his fedora, a gesture both courteous and theatrical, and followed Clarence out of the ballroom. The crowd erupted into whispers as soon as he was gone, accusations and theories flying like sparks. But Blanc, now in the quiet of the manor's corridors, was already at work, his mind turning over the smudge, the pedestal, the locked doors, and the 100 pairs of eyes that had failed to see the theft. The corridor was a labyrinth of history, its walls lined with portraits of Blackthorn's past, their stern faces watching Blanc as he passed. Clarence led him through the manor's heart, past the library with its leather-bound tomes, the conservatory with its wilting orchids, the dining hall where a chandelier swayed faintly in the draught. Blanc asked questions, his drawl deceptively, casual. When was the pedestal last cleaned? Who had access to the ballroom before the gala? Did anyone notice a guest lingering near the necklace? Clarence answered dutifully, but his responses were vague, his nerves evident. As they reached the servants' quarters, Blanc paused, his eyes catching on a small detail, a candle stub on a side table. Its wax dripped in a pattern that mirrored the smudge on the pedestal. "Now, ain't that peculiar?" he said, more to himself than to Clarence. He crouched, examining the stub without touching it, his mind racing. Wax, a smudge, a locked room, pieces of a puzzle that didn't yet fit. "Mr. Blanc," Clarence ventured, his voice hesitant, "do you really think you can find the necklace? The Blackthorns? They're not like other families. They keep things hidden, even from each other." Blanc stood, his smile returning. "Oh, I'm counting on that, Clarence. Secrets are like breadcrumbs. They always lead somewhere. And I've got a mighty fine appetite for 'em." They continued the tour, Blanc's satchel swinging lightly at his side, his eyes missing nothing. Back in the ballroom, the tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every passing minute. The smudge on the pedestal, the wax in the corridor, small, seemingly insignificant details, but to Benoit Blanc, they were the first threads in a tapestry of deception. The thief was clever, but Blanc was something else entirely. A man who saw the world as a puzzle, and every puzzle had a solution. As the clock struck 9 a.m., a new sound echoed through the manor. A faint creak, like a door opening in a distant room. Blanc's head tilted, his smile sharpening. The game was on, and the next clue was waiting. The storm had settled into a sullen rhythm by mid-morning, its thunder reduced to a low grumble, its rain a steady drumbeat against Blackthorn Manor's ancient windows. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion, a fog that clung to every velvet, curtain and gilded frame. The ballroom, once a stage for opulence, now felt like a courtroom, with Benoit Blanc as both judge and jury. His arrival had shifted the manor's dynamics, turning whispers into accusations and glances into interrogations. The star of midnight was still missing, its absence a wound that festered with every passing hour. And yet, Blanc moved through the chaos with the calm of a man who'd seen worse, who'd unravelled worse. The guests were restless, confined to the ballroom and its adjacent parlours under Eleanor Blackthorn's iron decree. The pedestal where the necklace had rested stood like a ghost, its empty velvet case a silent taunt. Theodore Blackthorn paced near it, his tie loosened, his charm eroded by frustration. Cassandra sat poised on a chaise, her crimson gown a stark contrast to her cool, calculating gaze. Beatrice fidgeted with her crescent moon pins, her defiance tempered by unease. Julian, nursing a fresh whisky, leaned against a wall, his smirk a mask for something darker. Margaret hovered near the bookcase, her handkerchief twisted into a knot, her eyes darting as if expecting the necklace to reappear. The non-Blackthorns, Senator, Grayson, Lydia, Viviane Dubois, Dr. Klein, formed their own clusters, their voices a mix of outrage, gossip, and thinly veiled agendas. The waiters, under Clarence the butler's watchful eye, stood rigid, their faces betraying nothing but fear of being scapegoated. Blanc had returned from his tour of the manor, his tweed suit slightly damp from the corridor's chill, his fedora now resting on a side table. His leather satchel lay open beside it, revealing a notebook, a fountain pen, and a small magnifying glass that glinted in the chandelier's light. He stood near the pedestal, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, like a predator sizing up a field of prey. The smudge of wax he'd noticed earlier, a faint oily mark on the pedestal's base, had set his mind alight, but he hadn't shared its significance. Not yet. To Blanc, clues were like notes in a symphony, each one meaningless until played. in concert, and this symphony was just beginning. Eleanor approached him, her emerald gown catching the light, her expression a blend of hope and steel. "Mr. Blanc," she said, her voice low to avoid the eavesdropping crowd. "You mentioned a smudge. Is it significant?" Blanc tilted his head, his drawl warm but cryptic. "Mrs. Blackthorne, in my experience, nothing in a crime scene is insignificant. That smudge, wax I reckon, is like a whisper in a quiet room. It's there, but you gotta listen close to hear what it's saying." Theodore, overhearing, stopped pacing and crossed his arms. "Wax? You're basing this entire investigation on a spot that could have come from a candle during setup. This is a waste of time." Blanc's smile was polite, but his eyes glinted with challenge. "Mr. Blackthorne, if I dismissed every spot as unimportant, I'd still be chasing my tail in Kentucky. That wax ain't just a mark, it's a question. Why's it there? Who left it? And why on a pedestal that was polished to a shine before the gala?" Cassandra leaned forward, her voice smooth as silk. "You're suggesting it was deliberate? Part of the theft?" Blanc shrugged, a deceptively casual gesture. "I'm suggesting it's out of place, Mrs. Blackthorne. And, in a locked room with a missing sapphire, anything out of place is a thread worth pulling." Beatrice, unable to stay silent, hopped off her table perch. "Okay, but what's the thread leading to? You've been here for hours, and all we've got is a smudge. Are you actually going to find the necklace, or is this just a performance?" The room stilled, all eyes on Blanc. His chuckle was low, almost musical, as he met Beatrice's gaze. "Miss Blackthorne, I assure you, I ain't here for the applause. But since you're asking, let's tug on that thread together, shall we?" He turned to the crowd, clapping his hands once, the sound cutting through the murmurs. "Folks, gather round. I'm about to do what I do best, make sense of the senseless. But I need y'all to help me paint the picture. Who was near this pedestal between, say, 11:30 p.m. and 12:03 a.m. when the necklace took its unscheduled leave?" The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their silence louder than words. Senator Grayson cleared his throat, his voice booming. "This is ridiculous. I was dancing with Lydia at that time. We were nowhere near the thing." Lydia nodded vigorously, her earrings swaying. "Exactly. We were in the middle of the waltz. Everyone saw us." Viviane Dubois raised an eyebrow, her champagne flute dangling lazily. "Not everyone, chérie. I was near the pedestal, admiring the necklace's craftsmanship. But I assure you, I didn't touch it." Her smile was coy, her accent a velvet trap. Dr. Klein, clutching his notebook, stammered, "I was taking notes on the star's history, but I was at the back of the room. I couldn't even see the pedestal clearly." Margaret stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I was close by, as I said last night. I always check on the necklace during the gala. It's tradition. But I didn't see anyone take it, I swear." Blanc listened, his eyes flicking from face to face, his expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt, didn't press. He simply absorbed, his mind cataloguing every word, every hesitation, every glance. When the room fell silent again, he nodded, as if satisfied with a puzzle piece slotting into place. "All right," he said, his drawl slow and deliberate. "That's a start. But let's not get hung up on who was where just yet. The truth don't always lie in the obvious. Sometimes it's in the shadows, literally. He crouched beside the pedestal, his magnifying glass now in hand, and examined the smudge again. The crowd leaned forward, their curiosity outweighing their unease. Blanc's fingers hovered over the mark, his brow furrowing. Then, with a faint hum, he stood and turned to Clarence, who stood nervously at the room's edge. "Clarence, my good man," Blanc said, his tone almost jovial, "tell me about the candles in this room last night. Were they lit? And if so, where were they placed?" Clarence blinked, caught off guard. "Candles, sir? Yes, there were candles, part of the decor. We had candelabras on the tables and some wall sconces, all lit, as per Mrs. Blackthorne's instructions. But none were near the pedestal. It was kept clear to showcase the necklace." Blanc nodded, his eyes glinting. "None near the pedestal. Interesting. So, how does a smudge of wax end up here, on a surface that's supposed to be pristine? Unless—" He trailed off, his gaze drifting to the ceiling, where a massive chandelier hung, its crystals dim in the morning light. The crowd followed his gaze, their murmurs rising. Theodore scoffed. "What, you think someone climbed the chandelier to drop wax? This isn't a circus, Blanc." Blanc's smile was enigmatic. "Oh, I ain't saying anyone climbed anything, Mr. Blackthorne. But I am saying that wax don't walk itself onto a pedestal. Someone, or something, put it there. And I intend to find out why." He turned to the crowd, his voice taking on a theatrical edge, as if addressing an audience in a play. "Now, folks, here's where things get fun. I'm going to need a volunteer. Someone who's not afraid to get their hands a little dirty in the name of truth. Any takers?" The room was silent, the guests frozen like statues. Then, to everyone's surprise, Beatrice stepped forward. Her chin lifted. Fine, I'll do it. Let's see what you're getting at." Blanc's eyes sparkled with approval. "Miss Blackthorne, you're a woman after my own heart. Come on over here. We're going to take a closer look at this pedestal, not just the smudge, but the whole shebang." Beatrice joined him, her movements brisk, but her eyes wary. Blanc handed her a small cloth from his satchel, instructing her to wipe the pedestal's base gently, avoiding the smudge. As she did, Blanc watched, his magnifying glass poised. The crowd held its breath, the tension palpable. "There," Blanc said suddenly, pointing to a spot just below the smudge. "Stop! Look at that!" Beatrice squinted, then gasped. Embedded in the pedestal's wood, nearly invisible against the dark grain, was a tiny sliver of metal, sharp, glinting, no bigger than a needle's tip. The crowd surged forward, their voices overlapping in confusion and intrigue. "What is that?" Cassandra asked, rising from her chaise, her composure slipping. Blanc's smile was triumphant, but his voice was calm. "That, Mrs. Blackthorne, is our first clue. A piece of metal lodged in the pedestal right beside our mysterious wax smudge. Now, ain't that a curious pair?" Theodore threw up his hands. "A piece of metal? It could be from anything. A tool, a guest's jewellery, a waiter's tray." Blanc nodded, as if conceding the point. "Could be, could be. But here's the thing, Mr. Blackthorne. This metal ain't just any scrap. It's polished, precise, like it was meant to be there. And it's sitting next to wax, which ain't supposed to be there either. That's not a coincidence. That's a conversation. Julian, watching from the sidelines, let out a dry laugh. A conversation? You're talking about this like it's a damn poem, Blanc. What does it mean? Blanc turned to him, his eyes narrowing slightly. Mr. Blackthorne, it means someone tampered with this pedestal, and they left us a trail. The wax and the metal, they're breadcrumbs leading us somewhere. The question is, where? He stepped back, addressing the crowd again. Now, I don't expect you all to confess just yet, but I will say this. Whoever took that necklace is watching right now, and they're starting to sweat. Because I'm not just looking at clues, I'm looking at you. Your faces, your hands, your lies. And I'm very, very good at my job. The room erupted into chaos. Accusations flying like sparks. Senator Grayson bellowed about defamation. Lydia clutched her pearls. Viviane sipped her champagne with a knowing smirk. And Dr. Klein scribbled furiously, muttering about medieval lockpicks. The Blackthorns were no less rattled. Theodore glared. At Blanc, Cassandra's eyes darted to the pedestal. Beatrice stepped back, her face pale. Julian drained his glass, and Margaret's handkerchief tore in her hands. Eleanor raised a hand, her voice cutting through the din. Enough. Mr. Blanc, you've found something. Good. But we need more than cryptic hints. Can you trace this clue to the thief? Blanc met her gaze, his expression unyielding. Mrs. Blackthorne, I'm tracing it as we speak. But clues ain't like road signs. They don't point straight to the destination. They twist, they turn, they lie. My job is to follow 'em, and I will. You have my word. He turned to Clarence, who stood frozen, clutching a tray. Clarence, I'm gonna need a list of every item in this room last night. Every candelabra, every tray, every piece of jewellery worn by the guests. And I want to know who polished this pedestal before the gala. Can you manage that? Clarence nodded, his face ashen. Yes, sir. I'll have it within the hour. Blanc clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture both friendly and commanding. Good, man. Now, folks, I'm going to step out for a bit, clear my head, let these clues simmer. But don't get too comfortable. The truth's got a way of sneaking up when you least expect it. He picked up his satchel and fedora, tipping the latter to the crowd before striding toward the foyer. The guests watched him go, their faces a mix of awe, fear, and defiance. As Blanc reached the corridor, he paused, his eyes catching on a small detail, a faint scratch on the doorframe, barely visible in the dim light. He ran a finger over it, his smile sharpening. Well now, he murmured, another whisper. The corridor stretched before him, its portraits glaring down like silent witnesses. Blanc's mind was a whirlwind. The wax smudge, the metal sliver, the scratch on the doorframe, all pieces of a puzzle that was starting to take shape. But there was something else, something he hadn't shared with the crowd. The wax wasn't just wax. It had a faint scent, floral, like lavender. And lavender, in a room full of roses and champagne, was a clue in itself. Back in the ballroom, the tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every accusation. Beatrice slipped away to a corner, her fingers trembling as she adjusted her pins. Cassandra whispered something to Theodore, her eyes never leaving the pedestal. Julian poured another whiskey, his smirk gone. Margaret clutched her torn handkerchief, her lips moving in a silent prayer. And Eleanor stood alone, her gaze fixed on the empty case, as if willing the necklace to return. Outside, the storm had quieted, but a new sound echoed through the manor. A faint rhythmic tapping, like footsteps in a hidden passage. Blanc, standing in the corridor, tilted his head, his smile fading. The first clue had spoken, but the manor had more to say. And, somewhere in the shadows, the thief was listening. Chapter 4. Suspects in the Spotlight. The storm had retreated to a petulant drizzle by late morning, leaving Blackthorn Manor cloaked in a damp, grey haze. The Atlantic churned below the cliffs, its waves a restless murmur that mirrored the unease within the manor's walls. Inside, the ballroom was a pressure cooker, its opulence tarnished by suspicion and sleeplessness. The guests, confined for hours, were fraying at the edges, tuxedos rumpled, gowns creased, voices sharp with accusation. The empty pedestal, where the Star of Midnight had once gleamed, stood as a silent prosecutor, its velvet case accusing every soul in the room. And at the centre of it all was Benoit Blanc, his tweed suit pristine, his blue eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. Blanc had returned from his corridor wanderings, his satchel slung over one shoulder, his fedora back on his head at a rakish angle, the faint scratch on the doorframe and the lavender-scented wax smudge from Chapter 3 were tugged into his mental ledger, alongside the metal sliver and the candle stub from earlier. Each clue was a thread, and Blanc was weaving them into a tapestry only he could yet see. But clues alone wouldn't crack this case, not without understanding the players. The thief was in this room, hiding behind a mask of indignation or innocence, and Blanc knew the best way to unmask them was to shine a light on their secrets. The Blackthorns and guests were scattered across the ballroom, their alliances shifting like sand. Eleanor Blackthorn stood near the fireplace, her emerald gown catching the flicker of the flames, her composure a fortress despite the cracks in her family's unity. Theodore paced, his frustration boiling over into clipped commands to the staff. Cassandra sat with calculated poise, her crimson gown a beacon of control, her eyes scanning the room like a chess master. Beatrice, restless, toyed with her crescent moon pins, her defiance tempered by a flicker of fear. Julian, now on his 5th whiskey, slouched against a column, his smirk a brittle shield. Margaret hovered near the bookcase, her torn handkerchief a testament to her unravelling nerves. The non-Blackthorns, Senator Grayson, Lydia, Viviane Dubois, Dr. Klein, formed their own camps, their voices a cacophony of complaints and theories. The waiters, under Clarence's stern gaze, stood like statues, their silence a defence against suspicion. Blanc clapped his hands, the sound sharp enough to silence the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his southern drawl rolling like honey, "I reckon it's time we had a little heart-to-heart. This necklace of yours didn't sprout legs and waltz out of here. Someone took it, and that someone standing among us, trying to look as innocent as a Sunday morning. So, let's start peeling back the layers, shall we?" The crowd shifted, their faces a gallery of wariness and defiance. Blanc paced slowly, his loafers silent on the oak floor, his eyes flicking from one suspect to the next. "I'm going to ask some questions," he continued, "and I expect answers. Not stories, not excuses, answers. If you're thinking of lying, don't. I've got a nose for it, and it's twitching already." He stopped before Theodore, who froze mid-pace, his jaw tightening. "Mr. Blackthorne," Blanc said, his tone deceptively genial, "you're the heir apparent, the man with the most to lose if this necklace stays gone. Tell me, where were you between 11:30 p.m. and 12:03 a.m. last night? And don't give me mingling with guests. I want specifics." Theodore's eyes narrowed, but he squared his shoulders, his voice firm. "I was near the bar, talking to Senator Grayson about a business deal. We were discussing tariffs, hardly the setting for a heist. Ask him yourself." Blanc glanced at Grayson, who nodded gruffly. "He's right. We were deep in it. Trade policies, import quotas. Theodore didn't leave my side." Blanc nodded, his smile faint but unyielding. "Tariffs, huh? Fascinating stuff. But here's the thing, Mr. Blackthorne. The bar's only 20 feet from the pedestal. A quick step, a sleight of hand, and you're back to quotas before anyone blinks. Opportunity ain't the same as guilt, mind you, but it's a mighty fine start." Theodore's face reddened. "Are you accusing me? In my own home?" Blanc raised a hand, his expression placating. "Accusing? No, sir. I'm just painting the picture. Now, let's add another brushstroke." He turned to Cassandra, who met his gaze with a cool, unflinching stare. "Mrs. Blackthorne, you were seen near the pedestal earlier in the evening, admiring the necklace. Care to share where you were when it vanished?" Cassandra's lips curved into a faint smile, as if she'd anticipated the question. "I was dancing with my husband's business associate, Mr. Langley, near the centre of the room. The waltz had just started. Everyone was watching us. I couldn't have been near the pedestal without drawing attention." Blanc tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "A waltz, you say? Mighty convenient, being the belle of the ball at the exact moment the necklace takes flight. But I'll take your word for now. Just one thing. That perfume you're wearing, it's lavender, ain't it?" Cassandra's smile faltered just for a fraction of a second. "Yes, it's lavender. Why do you ask?" Blanc shrugged, his drawl casual. "Oh, no reason. Just a curious nose is all." But his eyes gleamed, and the crowd murmured, sensing a trap. The lavender-scented wax from Chapter 3 was a live wire in Blanc's mind, but he wasn't ready to pull it, not yet. He moved on to Beatrice, who stood with her arms crossed, her chin lifted defiantly. "Miss Blackthorne," Blanc said, his tone softening, "you were mighty eager to help with the pedestal earlier. But last night you were seen pacing near the necklace, looking like you had something on your mind. Care to share what that was?" Beatrice's eyes flashed, but her voice was steady. "I was bored, okay? The gala's the same every year. Same people, same speeches. I was near the pedestal because I was thinking about sketching it for an art project. That's not a crime." Blanc nodded, his smile almost paternal. "Sketching, huh? A fine pursuit. But boredom's a funny thing, Miss Blackthorne. It makes folks restless, impulsive. And that pedestal was awful tempting, sitting there like a muse. You didn't touch it, did you?" Beatrice's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "No, I didn't touch it. I'm not a thief." Blanc studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, but restless folks notice things. Did you see anyone else near the pedestal? Anyone acting peculiar?" Beatrice hesitated, her eyes flicking to her family. I don't know. It was crowded. I wasn't paying attention." Blanc's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. Well, if your memory clears up, you let me know." He was about to move on when Julian let out a dry laugh, drawing all eyes. "Give it a rest, Blanc," Julian said, his whiskey glass dangling. "You're poking at kids now. If you want a suspect, look at someone with a real motive, like, say, our dear senator over there, who's been dodging debt collectors for years." Senator Grayson surged forward, his face purple. "How dare you! I'll have you sued for slander, you drunken poet!" Blanc raised a hand, his voice cutting through the chaos. Now, let's not start a brawl in this fine ballroom. Mr. Blackthorne, you've got a point. Motives are the meat of this mystery. So, let's hear it." He turned to Grayson, his tone deceptively mild. "Senator, you're a man of means, but rumour has it your campaign's running on fumes. A sapphire like the Star of Midnight could fix a lot of problems, couldn't it?" Grayson sputtered, his wife Lydia clutching his arm. "This is outrageous. I'm a public servant, not a common thief." Blanc nodded, unperturbed. "Public servant, sure. But public servants have private debts. And you were near the bar, not far from the pedestal, chatting with Mr. Blackthorne. Easy enough to slip away for a moment, ain't it?" Lydia gasped, her voice shrill. "We were dancing. Everyone saw us." Blanc's eyes flicked to her. "So you keep saying, Mrs. Grayson. But crowds are funny things. Folks see what they expect to see. A quick step, a distraction, and poof, the necklace is gone." He turned to Viviane Dubois, who watched the exchange with a cat-like smirk. "Miss Dubois, you admitted to being near the pedestal, admiring the necklace's craftsmanship. You're an art dealer. Sapphires are your bread and butter. Tell me, what's a jewel like that worth on the black market?" Viviane's laugh was soft, almost musical. "Oh, Mr. Blanc, you flatter me. The Star of Midnight? Millions, perhaps, but it's too recognizable to sell. I was simply appreciating its beauty, not plotting a heist." Blanc's smile was razor-sharp. "Beauty's a fine motive, Miss Dubois, and you've got the hands for it, steady, practised. The pedestal's case was opened clean, no scratches. That takes skill." Viviane's eyes narrowed, but her smile held. "Skill I have, but not motive. I'm a guest, not a criminal." Blanc nodded, moving on to Dr. Klein, who clutched his notebook like a shield. "Dr. Klein, you're a historian, obsessed with the Blackthorne legacy. You were scribbling notes all night, but you claim you were at the back of the room. Yet I hear you've been asking about the star's origins for years. A man with that kind of passion might see a theft as research." Klein's glasses slipped down his nose, his voice trembling. "Research? That's absurd. I study history, not steal it. I was nowhere near the pedestal." Blanc studied him, then nodded. "All right, Doctor, but passion's a funny thing. It blinds folks to their own actions." Finally, Blanc turned to Margaret, who shrank under his gaze. "Mrs. Blackthorne, you were near the pedestal, checking on the necklace as tradition. You're the family historian, the keeper of its secrets. If anyone knows the star's value, cursed or otherwise, it's you. Where were you when the scream went up?" Margaret's hands trembled, her voice barely audible. "I was near the bookcase, looking for a guest list. I didn't see anything, I swear." Blanc's eyes softened, but his voice was firm. "A guest list? At midnight? That's a mighty specific errand, ma'am. And you were close enough to see something. weren't you?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "I didn't. I couldn't." Blanc stepped back, addressing the room. "Well now, that's a fine start. Y'all are giving me plenty to chew on. Motives, alibis, and a whole lot of nerves. But here's the thing. One of you ain't just nervous. One of you's guilty, and I'm getting closer." The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping in a storm of denial and accusation. Theodore pointed at Viviane. Cassandra whispered to Beatrice. Julian laughed bitterly, and Grayson bellowed about lawyers. Eleanor raised a hand, her voice slicing through the din. "Mr. Blanc, enough games. What's your next step?" Blanc's smile was enigmatic. "My next step, Mrs. Blackthorne, is to follow the clues. That metal sliver, that lavender wax, they're talking, and I'm listening. But I need one more piece of the puzzle." He turned to Clarence, who stood rigid. "Clarence, you said the pedestal was polished before the gala. Who did the polishing?" Clarence swallowed, his voice unsteady. "That would be Mary, sir. One of the maids. She's in the servants' quarters now." Blanc nodded, his eyes glinting. "Then I reckon it's time I had a chat with Mary. But before I go—" He crouched beside the pedestal again, his magnifying glass catching the light. The crowd leaned forward, their breath held. Blanc's fingers traced the air above the metal sliver, then paused. His brow furrowed, his drawl softening to a murmur. "Well, I'll be damned." "What is it?" Beatrice demanded, her voice sharp. Blanc stood, brushing off his knees, his smile cryptic. "It's not just a sliver, Miss Blackthorne. It's a fragment, part of something bigger. A tool, maybe, or a piece of jewellery. And it's got a mark on it, faint but clear. A tiny crescent moon." The crowd gasped, their eyes darting to Beatrice, whose crescent moon pins gleamed on her gown. Her face paled, her hands dropping to her sides. That's not mine," she stammered. "I didn't do anything." Blanc raised a hand, his voice calm. "Easy, Miss Blackthorne. A clue ain't a conviction, but it's a mighty fine coincidence, don't you think?" Theodore stepped forward, his voice thunderous. "This is absurd. You're accusing my daughter based on a pin? Those could belong to anyone." Blanc's eyes met his, unyielding. "Could be, Mr. Blackthorne. But coincidences are like fireflies. They light up the dark, and I'm following the glow." He turned to the crowd, his voice taking on a theatrical edge. "Folks, I'm heading to talk to Mary, but I'm leaving. You with a thought. That crescent moon ain't just a clue. It's a signature. Someone wanted it found. So, ask yourselves, who's playing this game and why?" He picked up his satchel, tipped his fedora, and strode toward the servants' quarters, Clarence trailing behind. The ballroom exploded into chaos, Beatrice's protests drowned out by accusations. Eleanor's face was a mask, Cassandra's. Eyes narrowed, Julian's glass slipped from his hand, and Margaret collapsed into a chair, sobbing. The non-Blackthorns were no less rattled. Grayson demanded a lawyer. Lydia clutched her husband. Viviane's smirk faded, and Klein scribbled frantically. In the corridor, Blanc's steps were brisk, his mind racing. The crescent moon fragment, the lavender wax, the scratch on the doorframe. They were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was still blurry. Mary, the maid, might hold the key, or she might be another misdirection. As he reached the servants' quarters, a new sound stopped him cold. A faint metallic clink, like a coin dropping in a hidden room. Blanc's smile sharpened, his hand tightening on his satchel. The spotlight was on, and the thief was starting to sweat. Chapter 5. The Art of Observation. The rain had dwindled to a faint mist by noon, cloaking Blackthorn Manor in a ghostly veil. The Atlantic's roar had softened, but the cliffs below still bore the scars of the storm's fury. Inside the manor was a cauldron of distrust, its grand halls and gilded rooms suffocating under the weight of secrets. The ballroom, where the star of midnight had vanished, was now a stage for Benoit Blanc's relentless pursuit of truth. His interrogations in Chapter 4 had lit a fuse, and the Blackthorn family and guests were teetering on the edge of explosion. The crescent moon fragment, with its damning resemblance to Beatrice's pins, had cast a shadow over the young Blackthorn. But Blanc knew better than to trust a clue at face value. The thief was clever, and this game was far from over. Blanc stood in the servants' quarters, a cramped, dimly lit space that contrasted sharply with the manor's opulence. The air smelled of damp wool and boiled tea, and the walls were lined with faded photographs of long-serving staff. Mary, the maid, who had polished the pedestal, sat before him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was young, no more than 20, with mousy brown hair and eyes that darted like a cornered animal's. Clarence hovered nearby, his stern presence a silent warning to the girl. But Blanc's demeanour was warm, disarming, his southern drawl a soothing balm. "Mary, darling," Blanc said, leaning forward in a creaky wooden chair, "I ain't here to scare you. I just need the truth, plain and simple. You polished that pedestal before the gala, didn't you?" Mary nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir. I did it myself, like always. Mrs. Blackthorn insists on it. Says the Star of Midnight deserves a proper stage." Blanc smiled, his eyes crinkling. "A proper stage indeed, and you did a fine job from what I saw. That pedestal was shining like a mirror. So, tell me, did you notice anything unusual while you were polishing? Any marks, any scratches, anything that didn't belong?" Mary's fingers twisted in her apron, her gaze dropping to the floor. "No, sir. It was clean as a whistle. I used the special cloth, the one Mrs. Blackthorn keeps locked in her study. I didn't see no marks or nothing." Blanc's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened, catching the slight tremor in her voice. "No marks at all. Not even a smudge, maybe something waxy with a hint of lavender." Mary's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Lavender? No, sir, I don't know nothing about that. I just polished and left. I swear it." Blanc leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on his satchel. "All right, Mary, I believe you're trying to be honest. But here's the thing. That pedestal's got a story to tell, and it's got your name in the margins. You were the last to touch it before the gala, and now we've got wax, a metal sliver, and a crescent moon fragment. You sure there's nothing you're forgetting?" Mary's face paled, and she shook her head vehemently. "I didn't see nothing, sir. I just did my job and went to help in the kitchen. I wasn't even in the ballroom when the necklace went missing." Blanc studied her for a long moment, his silence more probing than any question. Then he nodded, his tone gentle. "All right, darling, you go on back to your duties. But if you remember anything at all, you come find me, you hear?" Mary nodded, practically fleeing the room, her apron fluttering behind her. Clarence cleared his throat, his voice low. "She's a good girl, Mr. Blanc. Nervous, but honest. You don't think she's involved, do you?" Blanc stood, adjusting his fedora. "Clarence, in a case like this, I don't think anyone's involved until I know they are. But I'll tell you this, Mary's scared, and not just of me. Something's got her spooked, and I aim to find out what." As they left the servants' quarters, Blanc's mind was a whirlwind. Mary's fear was genuine, but her story was too clean, too rehearsed. The lavender wax, the crescent moon fragment, the metallic clink he'd heard in the corridor. They were pieces of a puzzle, but the edges didn't yet align. And then there was the scratch on the doorframe from chapter 4, a detail he hadn't shared with anyone. It was faint, but deliberate, like a marker left for a purpose. Blanc's intuition told him the thief was playing a game, leaving breadcrumbs to taunt him, or to mislead him. Back in the ballroom, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Beatrice stood apart from her family, her face pale, her crescent moon, pins glinting accusingly in the chandelier's light. Theodore hovered protectively near her, his glare daring anyone to speak against his daughter. Cassandra sat with her hands folded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes followed Blanc like a hawk's. Julian, now visibly unsteady from whiskey, muttered to himself, his earlier bravado crumbling. Margaret clutched a new handkerchief, her lips moving in a silent litany, while Eleanor stood by the fireplace, her gaze fixed on the empty pedestal as if it held the answers. The non-Blackthorns were no less agitated. Senator Grayson paced, muttering about lawsuits, while Lydia whispered furiously to a group of socialites, her earrings swaying like pendulums. Viviane Dubois lounged against a table, her champagne flute empty, but her smirk intact, as if the chaos were a private amusement. Dr. Klein scribbled in his notebook, his glasses fogging with nervous sweat, his theories about the star's curse growing wilder by the minute. Blanc re-entered the ballroom, his presence commanding silence. Hidiou set his satchel on a table, opened it, and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, flipping it open with a flourish. "Well now," he said, his drawl cutting through the tension, "that was an illuminating chat with a young Mary. She's a fine girl, but she's holding something back. And that's got me thinking about the art of observation." Paced slowly, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "Y'all see, observation ain't just looking, it's seeing. It's noticing the things that don't fit, the shadows that move when they shouldn't. That pedestal, for instance, it's telling us a story, but we got to look past the obvious to hear it. The wax, the metal, the crescent moon, they're not just clues, they're choices. Someone chose to leave them, and I want to know why." Beatrice, unable to stay silent, stepped forward, her voice trembling but defiant. "You keep talking about my pins, Mr. Blanc, but I didn't do anything. Those crescent moons are just a design. I got them from an art shop in Boston. Anyone could have something like that." Blanc nodded, his expression almost sympathetic. "Miss Blackthorne, I don't doubt your word, but clues don't care about intentions. They point where they point. That crescent moon fragment's got a story, and I'm going to find out what it is. For now, let's say it's a distraction." Theodore's fists clenched. "A distraction. You're playing games with my daughter's reputation. If you've got evidence, show it. Otherwise, stop fishing." Blanc's smile was unruffled. "Mr. Blackthorne, I ain't fishing, I'm hunting. And the evidence is right here, in this room, in your faces, your words, your secrets. But since you're eager, let's take a closer look at something else." He moved to the pedestal, his magnifying glass in hand, and crouched beside it. The crowd surged forward, their curiosity outweighing their fear. Blanc's fingers traced the air above the crescent moon fragment, then shifted to the velvet case itself. He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing, and let out a soft hum. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, his drawl laced with intrigue. "What is it?" Cassandra asked, rising from her seat, her voice sharp. Blanc stood, brushing off his knees, and held up a tiny object between his fingers. A single, delicate thread, pale blue and barely visible in the light. "This, Mrs. Blackthorne, is what we call a gift. A thread caught in the hinge of the velvet case. Now, ain't that peculiar?" The crowd gasped, their voices overlapping. Eleanor stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "A thread? From what?" Blanc's smile was cryptic. "Could be a gown, a scarf, a glove, anything that brushed against this case when it was opened. But it's pale blue, and that's a mighty specific shade. Anyone here wearing pale blue last night?" The guests looked around, their eyes scanning gowns and tuxedos. Lydia Grayson clutched her navy shawl. Vivian's dress was black, and Cassandra's was crimson. Beatrice's gown was black velvet, and Eleanor's was emerald. Margaret's navy dress was too dark, and the men's tuxedos were uniformly black or grey. The crowd murmured, their confusion growing. Julian, swaying slightly, pointed a finger. "What about the staff? One of the waiters could have worn a blue tie or something." Blanc nodded, his eyes glinting. "A fine point, Mr. Blackthorne. Clarence, any of your staff sporting pale blue last night?" Clarence shook his head, his voice firm. "No, sir. The waiters wore black vests and white shirts, standard uniform. The maids were in grey aprons, no pale blue." Blanc's smile widened, but his voice was low, almost dangerous. "Well then, that makes this thread a mighty fine clue. Someone opened this case, and they left a piece of themselves behind. Now, who's feeling a little exposed?" The room erupted into chaos, accusations flying like shrapnel. Theodore demanded a search of the guests' belongings. Cassandra suggested checking the manor's laundry, and Beatrice protested her innocence, her voice cracking. Julian laughed bitterly, muttering about curses, while Margaret sobbed into her handkerchief, her composure shattered. Grayson bellowed about his rights. Lydia clutched her husband. Vivian watched with detached amusement, and Klein scribbled furiously, his theories spiraling. Eleanor raised a hand, her voice a blade. "Mr. Blanc, this thread, is it enough to identify the thief?" Blanc met her gaze, his expression unyielding. "Mrs. Blackthorne, it's enough to narrow the field, but the thief's clever. They're not going to wave a pale blue flag and confess. This thread's a whisper, not a shout. My job's to make it sing." He turned to the crowd, his voice taking on a theatrical edge. "Now, folks, I'm going to need your help. I want everyone to think back to last night. Every gown, every scarf, every accessory. If you saw pale blue, you come to me. And if you're thinking of keeping quiet, don't. Silence is a choice, and I'm watching." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, lingering on each face. The tension was palpable, a coiled spring ready to snap. Then, to everyone's surprise, Viviane Dubois stepped forward, her smirk replaced by a cool, calculated expression. "Mr. Blanc," she said, her accent lilting, "I may have seen something." A guest near the pedestal, wearing a pale blue shawl. But I'd rather not say who, publicly. The crowd gasped, their eyes darting to one another. Blanc's smile was razor-sharp. "Ms. Dubois, you're a woman of discretion, and I respect that. Let's have a private chat, shall we? Clarence, mind finding us a quiet corner?" Clarence nodded, leading Blanc and Viviane to a small parlour off the ballroom. The crowd erupted into whispers as they left, their suspicions spiralling. In the parlour, Blanc sat across from Viviane, his notebook open, his pen poised. "All right, Miss Dubois," he said, his drawl soft but probing. "Who's this pale blue mystery guest?" Viviane leaned back, her eyes glinting. "I'm not certain, Mr. Blanc. It was a fleeting glimpse, a woman, I think, near the pedestal just before the scream. The shawl was pale blue, almost silvery in the light. But the room was crowded and I was distracted." Blanc's eyes narrowed, catching the hesitation in her voice. "Distracted, huh? By what, if I may ask?" Viviane's smile was coy. "By the beauty of the Star of Midnight, of course. It's a rare jewel, Mr. Blanc. One doesn't look away easily." Blanc nodded, his pen scratching a note. "Fair enough. But a pale blue shawl's a specific detail, Miss Dubois. You're sure it was a woman?" Viviane hesitated, then nodded. "I believe so, but I can't swear to it. The moment was chaotic." Blanc studied her, his silence more probing than any question. Then he smiled, closing his notebook. "Thank you, Miss Dubois. You've been most helpful. But a word of advice. If you're holding back, now's the time to come clean. The truth's got a way of finding its own way out." Viviane's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered with unease. "I've told you what I saw, Mr. Blanc. Nothing more, nothing less." Blanc stood tipping his fedora. "Then we'll leave it there. For now." As they returned to the ballroom, the tension was a living thing, wrapping the guests in its coils. Blanc's mind was racing, the pale blue thread and Viviane's vague testimony adding new layers to the puzzle. The crescent moon fragment pointed to Beatrice, but the thread suggested another player, or a deliberate misdirection. And then there was the metallic clink from the corridor, a sound that lingered in Blanc's mind like a warning. He approached the pedestal again, his magnifying glass in hand, and examined the thread more closely. It was fine, almost gossamer, with a faint sheen that caught the light. But there was something else, a tiny speck of dust or perhaps ash clinging to it. Blanc's brow furrowed, his drawl softening to a murmur. "Well now, ain't that a curious little hitchhiker?" He stood slipping the thread into a small envelope from his satchel, his eyes scanning the crowd. The guests were watching him, their faces a mix of fear, defiance, and curiosity. Blanc's smile was enigmatic, but his voice carried a new edge. "Folks, we're getting warmer. This thread's a clue, but it's got a friend. A speck of something that don't belong. Ash, maybe, or dust. And that's got me thinking about fire." The crowd murmured, their confusion growing. Theodore crossed his arms. "Fire? What are you talking about, Blanc? There was no fire last night." Blanc's eyes glinted. "Not Ablaze, Mr. Blackthorne. But fire leaves traces, ash, soot, smoke. And this speck, it's telling me someone was near something hot, something that burned. Now, who in this fine manor's been playing with matches? The room fell silent, the guests exchanging uneasy glances. Then, from the back, a small voice broke the tension. Margaret, her face pale, her handkerchief in shreds. "The fireplace," she whispered. "It was lit last night, near the pedestal. I saw someone standing by it, just before the scream." Ness' head snapped toward her, his smile sharpening. "Mrs. Blackthorne, you've got my attention. Who was it?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. I don't know. It was dark and I was distracted, but they were near the fireplace, I'm sure of it." Blanc nodded, his mind racing. The fireplace, the ash, the pale blue thread, they were pieces of a puzzle, and the picture was starting to take shape. But there was something else, something he hadn't shared. The speck on the thread wasn't just ash. It had a faint, chemical scent, like polish or solvent, and that, in a manner full of wax and lavender, was a clue worth chasing. He turned to the crowd, his voice ringing with authority. "All right, folks, here's the deal. Someone in this room was near that fireplace, and they left a trail. I'm gonna find it, and when I do, the star of midnight's gonna shine again. But for now, I need you to think. Anybody see someone by that fireplace last night? Anybody at all?" The room was silent, the tension a coiled spring. Then, from the shadows, a new sound emerged. A faint, deliberate cough, like someone trying to be noticed. Blanc's eyes darted toward it, his smile fading. The art of observation had just revealed its next subject, and the thief was running out of places to hide. Chapter 6. A twist in the tale. The mist outside Blackthorne Manor had thickened by early afternoon, wrapping the estate in a shroud that muffled the Atlantic's restless churn. The storm's fury had faded, but its aftermath lingered, a damp chill that seeped through the manor's stone walls, settling into the bones of its occupants. Inside, the ballroom was a tinderbox, its air heavy with suspicion and the acrid tang of fear. The star of midnight's absence was a wound that refused to heal, and Benoit Blanc's relentless probing had turned the guests into a gallery of frayed nerves and hidden agendas. The pale blue thread, the crescent moon fragment, the lavender-scented wax and the ash-like speck from Chapter 5 were puzzle pieces in Blanc's mind. But the picture they formed was still tantalizingly out of reach, and now a faint cough from the shadows had drawn his attention, a signal that the game was about to take a sharp, unexpected turn. Blanc stood at the centre of the ballroom, his tweed suit a beacon of calm amidst the chaos. His fedora rested on a nearby table, his silver-blonde hair catching the chandelier's dim glow. His satchel lay open, revealing his notebook, magnifying glass, and a small envelope containing the pale blue thread, a clue that had ignited a firestorm of accusations. The Blackthorne family was fracturing under the pressure. Eleanor's regal composure was strained, her emerald gown creased from hours of standing sentinel. Theodore's frustration had boiled into barely contained rage, his tie discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up. Cassandra's cool facade was cracking, her crimson gown a stark contrast to her tightening jaw. Beatrice, still reeling from the crescent moon fragment's implication clutched her pins, her defiance crumbling into doubt. Julian, swaying from whiskey, muttered curses, his smirk replaced by a haunted stare. Margaret, her handkerchief in tatters, seemed on the verge of collapse, her whispers now audible prayers. The non-Blackthorns were no less volatile. Senator Grayson bellowed about his reputation, his face a mottled red. Lydia clung to him, her navy shawl slipping, her eyes darting like a trapped bird's. Viviane Dubois, her black dress elegant but her smirk gone, watched Blanc with the wariness of a chess player facing checkmate. Dr. Klein, his notebook overflowing, scribbled theories about cursed jewels, his glasses fogged with nervous sweat. The waiters, confined to a corner under Clarence's stern gaze, stood rigid, their silence a shield against the growing suspicion that one of them might be involved. Blance's eyes, sharp as cut glass, fixed on the spot where the cough had sounded, a shadowed alcove near the ballroom's rear, where a velvet curtain hung askew. The crowd followed his gaze, their murmurs falling silent. Blanca's voice, warm but laced with steel, cut through the tension. "Well now," he said, his southern drawl rolling like a slow river. "Seems we've got a shy guest in the wings. Care to step into the light, or shall I come fetch you?" The room held its breath, the only sound the faint drip of rain beyond the windows. Then, with a rustle of fabric, a figure emerged. A young waiter, no more than 25, his black vest and white shirt pristine, but his face pale as death. His name tag read Elliot, and his hands trembled as he clasped them before him. The crowd erupted into whispers, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. Blanc raised a hand, silencing them. "Easy, folks. Let's not hang the boy before he speaks. Elliot, is it? That was quite the cough. Something on your mind?" Elliot swallowed, his voice barely audible. I didn't mean to, sir. I saw something last night near the pedestal. I didn't say nothing before, 'cause I was scared." Blanc's smile was encouraging, but his eyes were predatory. "Scared's a natural thing, son, but the truth's a fine remedy for it. What did you see?" Elliot's eyes darted to the Blackthorns, then back to Blanc. "It was just before the scream, sir. I was clearing glasses near the fireplace, and I saw someone. They were by the pedestal, moving quick. They had something in their hand, something shiny, like a tool or a key. I couldn't see their face, but they were wearing a pale blue shawl, like Miss Dubois said." The crowd gasped, their eyes swinging to Viviane, who stiffened, her composure faltering. Blanc's smile didn't waver, but his voice took on a new edge. "A pale blue shawl, you say? That's mighty specific, Elliot. And you're sure it was near the pedestal, just before the necklace vanished?" Elliot nodded, his hands shaking. "Yes, sir. I swear it. I didn't say nothing, 'cause, well, I didn't want trouble. But when you mentioned the fireplace and the ash, I thought, maybe it's important." Blanc nodded, his eyes flicking to the fireplace, where embers still glowed faintly. "Important? Son, you've just handed me a golden ticket. But let's be clear. You didn't see a face, no distinguishing marks, just this shawl." Elliot hesitated, then shook his head. "No, sir. It was dark and they moved fast. I only saw the shawl 'cause it caught the firelight." Blanc's eyes narrowed, but his smile remained. "Fair enough. You've done right by speaking up, Elliot. Now go on back to your post, but don't stray too far. I might need you again." Elliot nodded, retreating to the waiter's corner, his face a mask of relief and fear. The crowd exploded into chaos, their voices overlapping in a storm of accusation. Theodore pointed at Vivienne. She admitted to being near the pedestal, and now this shawl nonsense. She's the thief. Vivienne's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. "Mon Dieu, Theodore, you're grasping at straws. I saw the shawl, yes, but it wasn't mine. I'm not the only one with eyes in this room." Cassandra rose, her voice cutting through the din. "Enough! Mr. Blanc, this is getting us nowhere. A shawl, a thread, a pin. Are we chasing ghosts or finding the necklace?" Blanc turned to her, his smile enigmatic. "Mrs. Blackthorne, we're not chasing ghosts. We're chasing choices. Someone chose to wear that shawl, chose to leave that thread, chose to drop that crescent moon fragment. And now, thanks to young Elliot, we've got a new piece of the puzzle. A shiny tool or key seen by the fireplace. That's not a ghost. That's a plan." Eleanor, her composure fraying, stepped forward. "Mr. Blanc, you're suggesting the thief used a tool to open the case, but the pedestal was locked and the key was with me all night." Blanc's eyes glinted, his drawl softening to a near whisper. "Was it, Mrs. Blackthorne? All night? Never left your sight, not even for a moment?" Eleanor's face paled, but her voice was steady. "I kept it in my clutch, as always. No one could have taken it without my knowledge." Blanc nodded, his smile cryptic. Well, let's hold that thought. For now, I've got a hankering to take a closer look at that fireplace. Something tells me it's got more to say than just ash." He moved to the fireplace, his magnifying glass in hand, the crowd trailing behind like moths to a flame. The hearth was wide, its marble mantel carved with intricate vines, its embers glowing faintly. Blanc crouched, his eyes scanning the grate, the surrounding floor, the mantel itself. The crowd held its breath, their curiosity outweighing their fear. Then, with a soft hum, Blanc reached into the ashes, his fingers brushing something solid. He pulled it out, holding it up to the light. A small brass key, its surface tarnished, but its shape unmistakable. The crowd gasped, their voices erupting in a cacophony of shock and intrigue. "What the hell is that?" Theodore demanded, his voice thunderous. Blanc stood, brushing ash from his fingers, his smile triumphant. "This, Mr. Blackthorne, is a twist in the tale. A key hidden in the fireplace, not 10 feet from the pedestal. Now, ain't that a curious place to lose something so important?" Eleanor's hand flew to her clutch, her face ashen. That's not possible. My key is here." She fumbled with the clasp, pulling out a similar brass key, its surface gleaming. The crowd murmured, their confusion spiraling. Blanc held up the tarnished key, comparing it to Eleanor's. "Well, now, 2 keys, 1 pedestal. That's a mighty fine plot twist, don't you think? Mrs. Blackthorne, you said your key never left your sight. So, how's this one end up in the ashes?" Eleanor's eyes widened, but her voice was firm. "I don't. No, it must be a spare or a fake. The pedestal's lock is unique. Only my key works." Blanc's smile was razor-sharp. "Unique, you say? Let's test that theory." He strode to the pedestal, the crowd parting like a sea, and inserted the tarnished key into the velvet case's lock. The room was silent, the only sound the faint click as the key turned. The case sprang open, its hinges smooth, its interior mocking the empty space where the Star of Midnight should have been. The crowd erupted, their voices a storm of shock and accusation. Eleanor staggered back, her hand clutching her chest. "That's impossible," she whispered. Blanc closed the case, slipping the tarnished key into his satchel. "Impossible, ma'am. In my line of work, impossible is just a polite way of saying I ain't figured it out yet. This key's real, and it's telling us someone had access to that pedestal. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing." Beatrice, her face pale, stepped forward. "But if there's a second key, anyone could have taken the necklace. It doesn't prove anything about my pins." Blanc nodded, his expression almost sympathetic. "You're right, Miss Blackthorne. It don't prove nothing, yet. But it changes the game. That crescent moon fragment, the pale blue thread, the lavender wax, and now this key. They're not just clues. They're a story, and someone's writing it with a mighty clever pen." Theodore's fists clenched. "This is ridiculous. A spare key doesn't mean anything. The thief could have planted it to throw us off." Blanc's eyes met his, unyielding. "Could be, Mr. Blackthorne. But planting a key takes planning, and planning takes motive. So, let's talk motives. Who in this room wanted that necklace? Bad enough to forge a key, slip past 100 eyes, and hide their tracks in ashes and wax." The crowd fell silent, their eyes darting to one another. Julian, swaying, let out a bitter laugh. "Motives! Hell, pick a name. Theodore's drowning in debt. Cassandra's got her eye on a new empire. Beatrice hates the family legacy. And I just hate everything." His voice cracked, his glass slipping to the floor. Cassandra's eyes flashed. "Watch your tongue, Julian. You're not exactly the picture of innocence, staggering around with your whiskey and your grudges." Julian smirked, but his eyes were hollow. "Grudges? Oh, I've got plenty. But I'm not dumb enough to steal a cursed necklace. That's a Blackthorne move, pure and simple." Margaret, sobbing softly, shook her head. "Please, stop this. The Star of Midnight isn't just a jewel. It's our heart. Whoever took it, they've torn us apart." Blanc's voice cut through the tension, calm but commanding. "Folks, I ain't here to watch y'all tear each other to pieces. I'm here to find the truth, and the truth's in the details. This key, for instance, it's not just a spare. It's old, older than the one Mrs. Blackthorne's holding. Look at the patina, the wear. This key's got history, and I'm betting it's tied to this manor." Dr. Klein, unable to stay silent, raised a hand. "Mr. Blanc, if I may, the Blackthorne family has a history of hidden safes and secret keys. In 1897, there was a theft at the manor, and a duplicate key was found in the library. Could this be related?" Blanc's eyes sparkled with approval. "Dr. Klein, you're a man after my own heart. History's a fine teacher, and this key's got a story to tell. But it's not just about the key. It's about the fireplace. Why hide it there? Why risk the ashes?" He turned to the crowd, his voice taking on a theatrical edge. "Let's play a game, shall we? I want everyone to think back to last night. Anyone near that fireplace, anyone touching it, poking at the logs, maybe dropping something in the flames. Speak up. and you might just save yourself some trouble." The room was silent, the tension a coiled spring. Then, to everyone's shock, Senator Grayson stepped forward, his face flushed but his voice steady. "Fine. I was near the fireplace, adjusting the logs. It was getting low, and I didn't want the room to go cold. But I didn't drop any damn key," Lydia gasped, clutching his arm. "Harold, why didn't you say anything?" Grayson's eyes narrowed. "Because it wasn't relevant, Lydia. I was just keeping the fire going, not stealing necklaces." Blanc's smile was enigmatic. "Senator, you're a man of civic duty, keeping the fire burning. But that fireplace is a mighty convenient place to lose a key, don't you think? And you were near the bar, not far from the pedestal, chatting with Mr. Blackthorne. Opportunity's knocking again." Grayson's face reddened, but before he could retort, Vivian spoke, her voice smooth as silk. "Mr. Blanc, if I may, the fireplace." Chapter 7. Patterns. Tell stories. The mist outside Blackthorne Manor had settled into a ghostly veil by late afternoon, softening the jagged cliffs and muting the Atlantic's restless churn. The storm's echoes lingered in the damp air, a reminder of the chaos that had swept through the estate the night before. Inside, the ballroom was a crucible, its gilded splendor tarnished by suspicion and exhaustion. The star of midnight's theft had fractured the Blackthorne family and their guests, turning allies into adversaries and secrets into weapons. Benoit Blanc, with his tweed suit and piercing blue eyes, was the eye of this storm, his calm demeanour a stark contrast to the fraying nerves around him. The discovery of the tarnished key in the fireplace, a duplicate that unlocked the pedestal's case, had upended the investigation, casting doubt on Eleanor's alibi and revealing a deeper layer of deception. Now, Blanc was ready to weave the clues into a narrative, a story that would bring the thief into the light. The ballroom was a tableau of tension. Eleanor Blackthorne stood by the fireplace, her emerald gown creased, her silver hair slightly askew, but her authority unshaken. Theodore paced, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his frustration a palpable heat. Cassandra sat with calculated poise, her crimson gown a beacon of control, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Beatrice, still reeling from the crescent moon, fragment's implication clutched her pins, her defiance warring with fear. Julian, his whiskey glass empty, leaned against a column, his smirk replaced by a haunted stare. Margaret hovered near the bookcase, her new handkerchief already fraying, her whispers now a soft chant of despair. The non-Blackthorns, Senator, Grayson, Lydia, Vivian Dubois, Dr. Klein, formed their own clusters, their voices a mix of indignation and conspiracy. The waiters, under Clarence's stern gaze, stood like statues, their silence a shield against the growing suspicion that one of them might hold the key to the mystery. Blanc stood before the pedestal, his satchel open on a nearby table, his notebook and magnifying glass at the ready. The tarnished key, the pale blue thread, the crescent moon fragment, the lavender-scented wax, and the ash-like speck with its chemical tang were pieces of a puzzle that had begun to align in his mind. The faint cough from Elliot, the waiter, had sparked a revelation, and the key in the fireplace had confirmed it. The thief wasn't just clever. They were theatrical, leaving clues like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. But Blanc was no mere wanderer in the woods. He was a storyteller, and he saw patterns where others saw chaos. He clapped his hands, the sound sharp enough to silence the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his southern drawl warm but commanding, "we've been dancing around this mystery long enough. It's time to stop chasing shadows and start reading the story. Clues ain't just objects. They're choices, deliberate as a painter's brushstrokes. And these clues, the wax, the thread, the key, the crescent moon, they're telling a tale. Let's see if we can't follow it to the end." The crowd leaned forward, their eyes fixed on Blanc, their suspicion tempered by curiosity. He paced slowly, his loafers silent on the oak floor, his hands gesturing like a conductor. "You'll see, a crime like this ain't random. It's a performance, staged with precision. The thief didn't just take the Star of Midnight. They left us a script. The lavender wax, for instance. Why leave a smudge that smells like a garden? The pale blue thread. Why let it catch in the case's hinge? The crescent moon fragment. Why drop it near the pedestal, where it points to young Miss Blackthorne? And this key." He held up the tarnished brass key, its surface glinting in the chandelier's light. "Why hide it in the fireplace, where it's bound to be found? These ain't mistakes, they're patterns, and patterns tell stories." Theodore crossed his arms, his voice sharp. "Stories? Blanc, we don't need metaphors. We need the necklace. If you've got something concrete, spit it out." Blanc's smile was unruffled, his eyes glinting with challenge. "Concrete, Mr. Blackthorne? Oh, I've got that in spades. But concrete without context is just a rock. Let me lay it out for you. These clues aren't isolated, they're connected like threads in a tapestry. The lavender wax, for starters. It's not just wax. It's got a chemical undertone, like polish or solvent. That's not something you find in a candelabra. It's deliberate, chosen for a reason." Cassandra raised an eyebrow, her voice smooth but probing. "A reason? Like what, Mr. Blanc? Are you saying the thief used lavender-scented polish to— what, clean the pedestal?" Blanc's chuckle was low, almost musical. "Not quite, Mrs. Blackthorne, but you're thinking along the right lines. That wax ain't for cleaning, it's for marking. It's a signal, a way to say, I was here, and it's tied to the pale blue thread, which ain't just a stray fibre. It's fine, almost gossamer, like something from a high-end garment. And that ash speck on it, it's not just fireplace soot. It's got a chemical bite, same as the wax. These clues are talking to each other, and they're pointing to someone who's playing a very careful game." Beatrice, her voice trembling, stepped forward. "But what about the crescent moon? You keep saying it's not proof I did it, but everyone's looking at me like I'm guilty. If it's part of this story, what's it saying?" Blanc's eyes softened, but his voice was firm. "Miss Blackthorne, that crescent moon's a red herring. Or at least it's meant to look like one. It's too perfect, too convenient, sitting there pointing at your pins. The thief wants us to think it's you, or at least to waste time chasing that lead. But patterns don't lie, and this one's screaming misdirection." The crowd murmured, their eyes darting to Beatrice, then back to Blanc. Eleanor, her composure fraying, spoke up. "Misdirection. Mr. Blanc, you're saying the thief planted these clues to mislead us. But the key, it opened the case. That's not misdirection. That's evidence." Blanc nodded, holding up the tarnished key. You're right, Mrs. Blackthorne. This key's the real deal, and it's the heart of the story. It's old, older than the one you've got, and it's got wear that speaks of history. Someone knew about it, knew where to find it, and knew how to use it. That's not a spur-of-the-moment theft. That's a plan, years in the making. Theodore threw up his hands. Years? You're saying someone's been plotting this since before the gala? That's absurd. Who would go to that much trouble for a necklace? Blanc's smile was razor-sharp. Who, Mr. Blackthorne? Why, someone with a grudge, a goal, or a ghost. The Star of Midnight ain't just a jewel. It's a symbol, a legacy. And legacies make folks do crazy things. Now, let's see if we can't find the next chapter in this story. He turned to the fireplace, where the tarnished key had been found, and crouched to examine it again. The crowd surged forward, their curiosity outweighing their fear. Blanc's magnifying glass glinted as he scanned the hearth, the mantel, the surrounding floor. Then, with a soft hum, he reached into the ashes, his fingers brushing something small and hard. He pulled it out, holding it up to the light. A tiny blackened button, its surface etched with a faint floral pattern. The crowd gasped, their voices overlapping in shock and intrigue. "What's that?" Cassandra demanded, her composure slipping. Blanc stood, brushing ash from his fingers, his smile triumphant. "This, Mrs. Blackthorne, is another piece of the pattern. A button, burned but intact, hidden in the fireplace alongside our key. Now, ain't that a curious place for a button to end up?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her voice steady but strained. "A button? From what? A coat? A dress?" Blanc's smile was cryptic. "Could be, ma'am. But it's not just any button. This floral pattern, it's specific like a signature. And it's got a trace of that same chemical scent as the wax and the ash speck. The thief's leaving us a trail, and it's getting bolder." Theodore's voice was thunderous. "A button? You're basing this on a button now? This is getting ridiculous, Blanc." Blanc's eyes met his, unyielding. "Ridiculous, Mr. Blackthorne? No, sir, it's deliberate. This button, the key, the thread, the wax, they're all part of the same story, and it's pointing to someone in this room. Someone who's been planning this for a long, long time." Julian, swaying slightly, let out a bitter laugh. "Story? Hell, Blanc, you're writing a novel. Why don't you just tell us who did it and be done with it?" Blanc's smile was enigmatic. "Patience, Mr. Blackthorne. A story's only as good as its ending, and we ain't there yet. But we're close. This button's a clue, but it's also a challenge. The thief's daring us to find them." He turned to the crowd, his voice taking on a theatrical edge. "Now, folks, let's play a little game. I want everyone to look at their clothing. Gowns, tuxedos, jackets, shawls. Any missing buttons? Any floral patterns? And don't be shy. If you've got something to say, now's the time." The guests hesitated, then began inspecting their attire, their movements frantic. Lydia Grayson clutched her navy shawl, her fingers tracing its edges. Vivienne Dubois smoothed her black dress, her eyes narrowing. Cassandra checked her crimson gown, her face unreadable. Beatrice's hands flew to her black velvet gown, her pins glinting. Theodore patted his shirt, his jaw tight. Julian shrugged. his rumpled suit buttonless. Margaret, trembling, fumbled with her navy dress, her eyes wide. Then, to everyone's shock, Dr. Klein stepped forward, his face flushed, his notebook slipping from his hands. I have a button like that," he stammered, pointing to his tweed jacket. He unbuttoned it, revealing a row of buttons with a faint floral pattern, one missing from the cuff. "But I didn't do anything. I was at the back of the room all night." The crowd erupted, their voices a storm of accusation. Theodore pointed at Klein. "He's the thief. He's been obsessed with the star for years." Klein's glasses fogged, his voice trembling. "That's not true. I'm a historian, not a criminal. I don't know how my button got there." Blanc raised a hand, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Easy, folks. A button ain't a confession, but it's a mighty fine coincidence. Dr. Klein, you say you were at the back of the room scribbling notes. But you were near the fireplace earlier, weren't you? Adjusting your jacket, maybe, near the embers." Klein's face paled. I might have been. It was cold and I stood by the fire for a moment, but I didn't drop anything, I swear." Blanc's smile was enigmatic. Well, let's hold that thought. For now, this button's telling us someone was near that fireplace, and they left more than ashes behind." He slipped the button into an envelope, adding it to his satchel alongside the pale blue thread and the tarnished key. The crowd watched, their faces a mix of fear, defiance, and curiosity. Blanc's mind was racing, the clues aligning like stars in a constellation. The lavender wax, the pale blue thread, the crescent moon fragment, the tarnished key, and now the floral button. They were a pattern, a story of intent and deception. But there was something else, a detail he hadn't shared. The button's floral pattern wasn't just decorative. It was identical to a design he'd seen in the Manor's library on a book of Blackthorn family crests. He turned to Clarence, who stood nervously at the room's edge. "Clarence, my good man, tell me about the library. Any old family records, crests or emblems with floral designs? Something that might match this button?" Clarence blinked, caught off guard. "The library, sir? Yes, there's a collection of family crests going back centuries. Mrs. Blackthorn, Margaret that is, knows them best. She's the historian, but I don't recall any buttons." Blanca's eyes flicked to Margaret, who froze, her handkerchief dropping to the floor. "Mrs. Blackthorn," he said, his voice gentle but probing. "You're the keeper of the family's past. Ever seen a floral pattern like this in your records? Maybe on a crest, a seal, or an heirloom?" Margaret's eyes widened, her voice trembling. I don't know. There are many crests, many designs. I'd have to look, but I don't think so." Blanc studied her, his silence more probing than any question. Then he nodded, his smile cryptic. "Fair enough, but I'm gonna need to take a peek at those records myself. Clarence, mind showing me the way?" Clarence nodded, his face ashen. "Of course, sir. This way." Before leaving, Blanc turned to the crowd, his voice ringing with authority. "Folks, we're getting close, so close I can almost hear the thief's heartbeat. These patterns, the wax, the thread, the key, the button, they're singing a song, and it's got a name. If you're thinking of running, don't. If you're thinking of lying, don't. The story's almost told, and I'm a damn fine reader." He tipped his fedora, a gesture both courteous and theatrical, and followed Clarence to the library. The ballroom exploded into chaos, Klein's protests drowned out by accusations. Eleanor's face was a mask. Cassandra's eyes narrowed. Beatrice's hands trembled. Julian poured another whiskey, and Margaret sank into a chair, her sobs echoing. The non-Blackthorns were no less rattled. Grayson demanded a lawyer. Lydia clutched her shawl. Vivian watched with a calculating gaze, and Klein fumbled with his notebook, his theories unravelling. In the library, the air was heavy with the scent of leather and dust. Shelves towered to the ceiling, filled with tomes and scrolls, their spines worn but proud. Blanc's eyes scanned the room, landing on a glass case containing a leather-bound book labelled Blackthorn Crests. He opened it, his fingers tracing the pages until he stopped at a faded illustration, a floral emblem, its petals curling like the pattern on the button. His smile sharpened, his drawl softening to a murmur. Well now, ain't that a fine coincidence? But there was something else. A faint mark on the page, a smudge of lavender wax, identical to the one on the pedestal. Blanc's heart quickened, his mind racing. The pattern was clear, but the story wasn't finished. As he closed the book, a new sound stopped him cold, a soft, deliberate creak, like a floorboard shifting under weight. He turned, his eyes narrowing, his hand tightening on his satchel. The story was telling itself, and the thief was running out of pages. Chapter 8. The trap is set. The mist outside Blackthorn Manor had deepened into a fog by early evening, cloaking the estate in an eerie silence that swallowed even the Atlantic's distant roar. The cliffs loomed like spectres, their edges blurred, as if the manor itself were drifting into a dream. Inside, the ballroom was a pressure cooker, its chandeliers casting long shadows that danced across the oak floor. The theft of the Star of Midnight had stripped away the Blackthorn family's veneer of unity, leaving raw nerves and fractured loyalties. Benoit Blanc, with his tweed suit and silver-blonde hair, was a lighthouse in this storm, his calm exterior masking a mind that burned with purpose. The floral button, tied to a Blackthorn family crest and marked by lavender wax, had brought him closer to the truth than ever before. The creaking floorboard in the library had been a warning. The thief was watching, and Blanc was ready to turn the tables. The ballroom was a cauldron of distrust. Eleanor Blackthorn stood near the pedestal, her emerald gown a faded echo of her earlier grandeur, her eyes sharp but weary. Theodore's pacing had slowed, his anger simmering into a cold resolve, his shirt sleeves stained with sweat. Cassandra sat with her hands folded, her crimson gown pristine, but her gaze restless, as if sensing a shift in the game. Beatrice, her crescent moon pins glinting, stood apart, her defiance reborn but brittle, her eyes darting to the crowd. Julian, his whiskey bottle now empty, slumped in a chair, his haunted stare fixed on the empty pedestal. Margaret, her handkerchief gone, clutched her navy dress, her sobs replaced by an eerie calm. The non-Blackthorns, Senator Grayson, Lydia, Vivian Dubois, Dr. Klein, huddled in their factions, their voices a low hum of conspiracy and fear. The waiters, under Clarence's watchful eye, stood rigid, their faces a mask of neutrality, though Eliot's earlier confession had cast a shadow over them all. Blanc stood before the crowd, his satchel open, his notebook filled with sketches of the clues. The lavender wax smudge, the pale blue thread, the crescent moon fragment, the tarnished key, the floral button, and now the blackthorn crest with its matching lavender mark. The creak in the library had confirmed his suspicion. The thief wasn't just hiding. They were orchestrating, manipulating the clues to control the narrative. But Blanc was a master of counterplay, and he was about to set a trap that would force the thief's hand. He clapped his hands, the sound a gunshot in the tense silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his southern drawl rich with anticipation, "we're at a turning point in this little drama. The star of midnight's out there, waiting to be found, and the thief's in this room, sweating bullets. But they're clever. Oh, they're clever as a fox in a henhouse. They've left us clues, not because they're careless, but because they're daring us to catch 'em. Well, I'm taking that dare, and I'm setting a trap." The crowd leaned forward, their eyes wide, their suspicion mingling with intrigue. Blanc paced, his loafers whispering on the floor, his hands gesturing like a magician. "You'll see, this ain't just a theft, it's a game of chess. The lavender wax, the pale blue thread, the crescent moon, the key, the button, the crest, their moves, each one calculated to lead us somewhere. But the thief's made one mistake. They're playing against me, and I don't lose at chess." Theodore's voice was sharp, his patience gone. "A trap? Blanc, we've had enough of your games. If you know who the thief is, name them. Stop dragging this out." Blanc's smile was unruffled, his eyes glinting. "Mr. Blackthorne, I'm not dragging, I'm building. You want the thief? Then let me set the board. The clues are a pattern, a story of intent, and they're pointing to someone who knows this manor better than most. Someone who's been planning this for years, using the Blackthorn legacy as their playbook." Cassandra's eyes narrowed, her voice smooth but edged. "Years? You're saying the thief's been plotting since before the gala? That's a bold claim, Mr. Blanc. Who could possibly have that kind of patience?" Blanc's chuckle was low, almost dangerous. "Patience, Mrs. Blackthorne. Oh, it's more than patience, it's obsession. The Star of Midnight ain't just a jewel, it's a crown, a symbol of power, and someone in this room wants that power bad enough to rewrite history." Beatrice, her voice trembling but defiant, stepped forward. "You keep talking about patterns, but what about me? That crescent moon fragment, it's still pointing at me, and now you're saying it's all a set-up? Prove it, Blanc. Clear my name." Blanc's eyes softened, but his voice was firm. "Miss Blackthorne, I'm working on it. That crescent moon's a decoy, meant to throw us off. But the real clues, the wax, the thread, the key, the button, the crest, they're singing a different tune. And I'm about to make 'em harmonize." He turned to the crowd, his voice taking on a theatrical edge. "Here's the plan, folks. Tonight, we're going to stage a little performance of our own. The thief thinks they're in control, but we're going to flip the script. I'm going to give 'em a chance to come clean. Voluntarily, and if they don't—" His smile sharpened, his eyes sweeping the room. "Well, I've got a surprise waiting." The crowd murmured, their faces a mix of fear and fascination. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice steady but strained. "A performance? Mr. Blanc, what exactly are you proposing?" Blanc's smile was enigmatic. "Mrs. Blackthorne, I'm proposing a test. The thief's been leaving clues to taunt us, so we're going to give him a chance to leave one more, on our terms. I'm going to recreate the scene of the crime, right, here tonight. We'll dim the lights, play the quartet's music, set the pedestal just like it was. And I'll be watching, waiting for the thief to make their move. Theodore's jaw dropped. You're staging a reenactment. That's insane. The thief's not going to just waltz up and confess. Blanc's eyes glinted. Maybe not, Mr. Blackthorne, but they'll do something. A glance, a step, a slip. And when they do, I'll be there. The trap's not in the reenactment. It's in the pressure. The thief's nervous, and nervous folks make mistakes. Cassandra's voice was soft, almost a whisper. And if they don't take the bait? What then? Blanc's smile was razor-sharp. Then, Mrs. Blackthorne, I've got a backup plan. The clues are talking, and they're pointing to a specific corner of this manor. I just need one more piece to seal the deal. He turned to Clarence, who stood nervously at the room's edge. Clarence, my good man, I'm going to need your help. Can you round up the staff and set this ballroom up like it was last night? Candles, music, the whole shebang, and make sure that pedestal's front and centre. Clarence nodded, his face pale but resolute. Yes, sir, I'll see to it. Blanc clapped him on the shoulder, then addressed the crowd. Folks, go get some rest, change if you need to, but be back here by 8 p.m. sharp. We're putting on a show, and I expect everyone to play their part. Oh, and one more thing. His voice dropped, his eyes narrowing. If you're the thief, now's your chance to come to me quietly, 'cause after tonight, there's no hiding. The crowd dispersed, their whispers a storm of speculation. Eleanor retired to her study, her face unreadable. Theodore stormed off, muttering about lawsuits. Cassandra slipped away, her eyes lingering on Blanc. Beatrice hesitated, then followed her mother, her pins glinting. Julian staggered to the bar, searching for a bottle. Margaret sank into a chair, her hands trembling. The non-Blackthorns scattered. Grayson and Lydia to their suite, Vivian to a parlour, Klein to his notebook, his theories spiralling. Blanc remained in the ballroom, his satchel open, his notebook now a map of the clues. The lavender wax, the pale blue thread, the crescent moon fragment, the tarnished key, the floral button, the blackthorn crest. They were a constellation, and the library's lavender smudge had been the North Star. But there was something else, a detail he'd noticed in the library, a faint outline in the dust on a shelf, as if a small object had been recently removed. It was subtle, but to Blanc it was a scream. He slipped into the corridor, his steps silent, and returned to the library. The air was heavy, the shelves looming like silent judges. He approached the glass case, his eyes scanning the book of crests. The lavender smudge was still there, a faint accusation, but his attention was on the shelf above, where the dust outline lay, a rectangular shape, no bigger than a cigarette case. He reached up, his fingers brushing the wood, and found a tiny catch, hidden in the carving. With a soft click, a panel slid open, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a folded piece of paper, its edges yellowed with age. Blanc unfolded it, his heart quickening. It was a letter written in a spidery hand, dated 1897, the year Dr. Klein had mentioned a previous theft at the manor. The letter read, "To the Keeper of the Star, the midnight's light is a curse not a blessing. It blinds those who wear it, and it draws blood from those who guard it. I have hidden the second key where the flames dance to protect our name. If you find it, use it wisely, or destroy it. The crest will guide you, but beware the shadow it casts. E.B. Blanc's smile sharpened, his mind racing. E.B., Eleanor, Blackthorn, or another ancestor? The letter confirmed the tarnished key's origins, tied to the fireplace and the floral crest. But it also hinted at a deeper motive, a curse, a shadow, a legacy of blood. The thief wasn't just after the necklace, they were settling a score. He slipped the letter into his satchel, closing the panel, and returned to the ballroom. The Otem staff were already at work, setting up candelabras, polishing the pedestal, tuning the quartet's instruments. Clarence approached, his face anxious. "Mr. Blanc, everything's ready. The guests will return at 8 p.m., as you asked. But are you sure this will work?" Blanc's smile was enigmatic. "Clarence, nothing's sure in a game like this. But the thief's been leading us on a merry chase, and I'm about to cut in on their dance. Keep your eyes open tonight. Watch. The guests, the staff, the shadows, the trap's set, and someone's gonna step in it." As the clock neared 8 p.m., the ballroom transformed, its grandeur restored. The chandeliers glowed, the candelabras flickered, and the quartet played a soft waltz, echoing the gala's elegance. The guests returned, their faces a mix of anticipation and dread. Eleanor wore a fresh gown, her composure restored. Theodore was in a clean shirt, his eyes wary. Cassandra's crimson gown gleamed, her smile calculated. Beatrice's pins were gone, replaced by a simple silver chain, her defiance muted. Julian, sober for the first time, stood stiffly, his hands shaking. Margaret wore a grey shawl, her eyes hollow. Grayson and Lydia were overdressed, their nerves betraying them. Vivian's black dress was elegant, her smirk cautious. Klein clutched his notebook, his glasses slipping. Blanc stood by the pedestal, his satchel at his side, his eyes scanning the crowd. The velvet case was open, empty, a silent challenge. He raised a hand, silencing the quartet, and addressed the room, his voice ringing with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the encore. Tonight we're replaying the night of the theft, down to the last note. The pedestal's here, the lights are low, and the star of midnight's waiting to be found. I'm watching and so are you. If you've got something to say, now's the time. If you've got something to do, go ahead and try. The trap's set, and I'm ready." The lights dimmed, the quartet resumed, and the guests began to move, their steps hesitant, their eyes darting. Blanc stood still, his gaze a net, catching every glance, every pause. Theodore lingered near the bar. Cassandra danced with a guest. Beatrice stood by the wall. Julian hovered near the fireplace. Margaret clutched her shawl. Grayson argued with Lydia. Vivian sipped champagne, and Klein scribbled furiously. Then it happened. A faint, deliberate shuffle, like a footstep behind. The velvet curtain near the pedestal. Blanc's head snapped toward it, his smile sharpening. The crowd froze, the music faltering. He moved toward the curtain, his hand on his satchel, his voice low but clear. "Well now, looks like someone took the bait." He pulled the curtain aside, revealing nothing but shadows. The crowd gasped, their confusion spiraling, but Blanc's eyes were on the floor, where a single fresh clue lay. A small silver hairpin, its tip bent, glinting in the candlelight. He picked it up, holding it aloft, his voice a quiet thunder. "And there it is, folks. The trap's sprung, and the thief's left us another gift. Now, who's missing a hairpin?" The room erupted, and the shadows seemed to close in. Chapter 9. The Final Clue. The fog outside Blackthorn Manor had thickened into a spectral curtain by nightfall, cloaking the estate in a silence that felt alive, as if the cliffs themselves were holding their breath. The Atlantic's murmur was a distant pulse swallowed by the mist that pressed against the manor's windows. Inside, the ballroom was a crucible of anticipation, its chandeliers casting a golden glow that failed to warm the icy tension. The reenactment of the gala, orchestrated by Benoit Blanc, had been a masterstroke. A trap that had yielded a silver hairpin, a bent, gleaming clue dropped behind the velvet curtain. The star of midnight's theft had unravelled the Blackthorn, family and their guests exposing grudges, secrets and lies. Now Blanc stood on the precipice of truth, his mind weaving the clues into a tapestry that would reveal the thief's face. The ballroom was a frozen tableau, the guests rooted in place, their eyes locked on Blanc as he held the hairpin aloft. The quartet's waltz had faltered, the candles flickered, and the pedestal's empty velvet case seemed to mock the crowd. Eleanor Blackthorn stood near the fireplace, her emerald gown a shadow of its former glory, her silver hair glinting with resolve. Theodore's fists were clenched, his shirt stained with sweat, his anger a smouldering ember. Cassandra's crimson gown was pristine, but her eyes darted, her composure fraying at the edges. Beatrice, her crescent moon pins replaced by a silver chain, stood defiant, though her hands trembled. Julian, sober but unsteady, gripped a chair, his haunted stare fixed on the hairpin. Margaret, her grey shawl slipping, was a statue of despair, her eyes hollow. The non-Blackthorns, Senator Grayson, Lydia, Viviane Dubois, Dr. Klein, clustered like wary animals, their voices silenced by the weight of the moment. The waiters, under Clarence's stern gaze, stood rigid, though Eliot's pale face betrayed his fear. Blance's tweed suit was impeccable, his silver-blonde hair catching the candlelight, his blue eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. His satchel lay open, revealing his notebook, the tarnished key, the pale blue thread, the floral button, and the 1897 letter, a constellation of clues that had led to this moment. The lavender wax, the crescent moon fragment, and now the silver. Hairpin were the final threads in a narrative of deception, and Blanc was ready to read it aloud. He lowered the hairpin, his southern drawl cutting through the silence like a blade. "Well now, folks," he said, his voice warm but laced with steel, "the trap's sprung, and our thief's left us a parting gift. This hairpin, bent, deliberate, dropped where I'd find it, isn't just a clue. It's a confession. The thief's running out of moves, and they're getting sloppy." The crowd erupted, their voices a storm of shock and accusation. Theodore stepped forward, his voice thunderous. "A hairpin? You're saying the thief's a woman? That's half the room, Blanc. Narrow it down." Blanc's smile was unruffled, his eyes glinting. "Patience, Mr. Blackthorn. I'm not saying it's a woman, not yet. Hairpins ain't exclusive to ladies. And this one's got a story that goes beyond gender. It's bent, see? Like it was used for something other than hair. Maybe to pick a lock, or to mark a spot. And it's silver, high quality, not the kind you find in a dime store. This is personal. Cassandra's voice was sharp, her composure cracking. Personal? Mr. Blanc, you're implying one of us dropped it intentionally. Why would the thief do that? Blanc's chuckle was low, almost dangerous. Why, Mrs. Blackthorne? 'Cause they're playing a game, and they're losing. The lavender wax, the pale blue thread, the crescent moon, the key, the button, the crest, and now this hairpin. They're not mistakes. They're taunts, dares, a way to say, catch me if you can. But I'm catching up, and they know it. Beatrice, her voice trembling but defiant, pushed forward. What about me? You said the crescent moon was a decoy, but now this hairpin? Is this another setup? I don't even wear hairpins anymore. Blance's eyes softened, but his voice was firm. Miss Blackthorne, I stand by what I said. The crescent moon's a red herring, meant to point at you and waste our time. This hairpin's different. It's not pointing at anyone. It's pointing at the act itself. Someone used this to tamper with the pedestal, and they left it behind to keep us guessing. Eleanor, her face pale, spoke up. Tamper? Mr. Blanc, the key you found opened the case. Why would the thief need a hairpin? Blanc held up the hairpin, its bent tip glinting. A fine question, Mrs. Blackthorne. The key opened the case, sure, but this hairpin's telling us something else. The pedestal's lock is clean, no scratches, no pry marks. But the case's hinge, where the pale blue thread was caught, it's got a tiny nick, like something sharp was used to jimmy it. This hairpin fits the bill. The crowd gasped, their eyes darting to the pedestal. Theodore's voice was a growl. So, you're saying the thief used the hairpin to break into the case, then left it behind? That's careless, not clever. Blanc's smile was razor-sharp. Careless? No, sir. Deliberate. The thief's been leaving clues from the start. Wax, thread, button, key, crest. They want us to follow, to see their brilliance. But brilliance blinds, and this hairpin's their first real stumble. Julian, gripping his chair, let out a bitter laugh. A stumble? Blanc, you're spinning fairy tales. If the thief's so brilliant, why not take the necklace and run? Why all this theatre? Blanc's eyes met his, unyielding. Theatre, Mr. Blackthorne, is the point. The Star of Midnight ain't just a jewel. It's a legacy, a curse, a grudge. Whoever took it didn't just want the sapphire. They wanted to make a statement, to tear this family apart. And they're doing a damn fine job. The crowd fell, silent, their faces a gallery of fear and realization. Margaret, her voice barely audible, whispered, A grudge, the letter you found from 1897. It mentioned a curse, a shadow. Is that what this is about? Blanc nodded, pulling the folded letter from his satchel. Mrs. Blackthorne, you're hitting the nail on the head. This letter, signed E.B., talks about hiding a second key to protect the family name. It warns of a curse, a shadow cast by the star. The thief knows this history. Hell, they're using it. The floral button tied to the blackthorn crest, the lavender wax in the library, the key in the fireplace. They're all nods to the past, to a wound that never healed. Dr. Klein, his notebook trembling in his hands, raised a hand. "Mr. Blanc, if I may, the 1897 theft was never solved. A sapphire brooch vanished and a duplicate key was found, just like now. Could the thief be recreating that crime?" Blanc's eyes sparkled with approval. "Dr. Klein, you're a man of insight. That's exactly what I'm thinking. The thief's not just stealing. They're restaging history, using the same tricks, the same symbols. But they've added their own flair. This hairpin, for instance. It's new, not part of the 1897 playbook." He turned to the crowd, his voice taking on a theatrical edge. "So, let's put it together, shall we? The lavender wax marks the pedestal and the library, tying the theft to the blackthorn crest. The pale blue thread, caught in the hinge, points to a high-end garment, maybe a shawl seen by the fireplace. The crescent moon fragment, a decoy, throws suspicion on Miss Blackthorn. The tarnished key, hidden in the ashes, unlocks the case and echoes the 1897 theft. The floral button, matching the crest, ties the thief to the family's history. And now this hairpin, bent and silver, used to tamper with the case. These clues are a story, and it's got a name." The crowd leaned forward, their breath held, their eyes wide. Theodore's voice was a snarl. "A name? Then say it, Blanc. Who's the thief?" Blanc's smile was enigmatic, his voice low but clear. "Not yet, Mr. Blackthorn. The story's got one more chapter, and I need one more clue to write it. But I'll give you this. The thief's in this room, and they're feeling the heat. They're watching, waiting, hoping I miss the mark. But I don't miss." He slipped the hairpin into an envelope, adding it to his satchel, and turned to Clarence. "Clarence, my good man, I need a favour. Can you check the Manor's guest rooms, every drawer, every wardrobe, for anything silver, maybe a hairpin case or a matching set? And while you're at it, look for pale blue fabric, something fine like a shawl or scarf." Clarence nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Yes, sir. I'll have the staff search immediately." Blanc clapped him on the shoulder, then addressed the crowd. "Folks, we're close, so close I can smell the sapphire. But the thief's clever, and they're not going to confess without a push. So, here's the deal. I'm giving you one last chance to come clean. Step forward, tell me where the star is, and we'll settle this like civilized folks. If not—" His smile sharpened, his eyes sweeping the room. "Well, I've got a feeling the next clue's going to do the talking for you." The crowd dispersed, their whispers a storm of panic and speculation. Eleanor retired to a parlour, her face unreadable. Theodore stormed off, muttering about evidence. Cassandra slipped away, her eyes lingering on the pedestal. Beatrice hesitated, then followed her mother, her silver chain glinting. Julian sank into a chair, his hands shaking. Margaret stood frozen, her shawl slipping to the floor. Grayson and Lydia huddled with their allies. Vivian sipped champagne with a cautious smirk, and Klein scribbled furiously, his theories spiralling. Blanc remained in the ballroom, his satchel open, his notebook now a roadmap of the clues. The hairpin was the key, not just to the case, but to the thief's mind. It was personal, a tool turned clue, left to taunt or to distract. But there was something else, a detail he hadn't shared. The hairpin's bent tip had a faint residue, a trace of the same chemical scent as the lavender wax and ash speck. It wasn't just a lockpick. It was a marker, a final signature. He slipped into the corridor, his steps silent, and headed to the servants' quarters, where Clarence was organizing the search. The air was heavy with the scent of polish and linen, the walls lined with faded photographs. Blanc found Elliot, the waiter, stacking trays, his face still pale from his earlier confession. "Elliot, my boy," Blanc said, his drawl gentle but probing. "You've been a help, speaking up about that pale blue shawl. But I need you to think hard. Anything else you saw that night? Maybe someone with a hairpin or something silver in their hand." Elliot's eyes widened, his hands trembling. I don't know, sir. It was so fast, and I was busy with the trays. But maybe I saw someone near the curtain just before the scream. They were adjusting their hair, or something like it. I didn't get a good look." Blanc's smile was encouraging. "That's fine, son. Even a glimpse helps. Was it a woman, a man? Any details?" Elliot hesitated, then shook his head. "I couldn't tell, sir. The light was low, and they were in the shadows. But they moved quick, like they didn't want to be seen." Blanc nodded, his mind racing. "All right, Elliot. You've done good. Keep your eyes open, you hear?" As he left the servants' quarters, Blanc's thoughts were a whirlwind. The hairpin, the shawl, the chemical residue. They were pointing to a single act, a single moment. But the thief's identity was still a shadow, hidden behind layers of misdirection. He returned to the ballroom where the staff were finishing their preparations, and found Clarence waiting, his face anxious. "Mr. Blanc," Clarence said, his voice low, "we've searched the rooms like you asked. Nothing silver, no hairpin, cases, but we found this in a guest's wardrobe, tucked in a drawer." He held out a pale blue shawl, its fabric fine and shimmering, its edges frayed as if torn. Blanc's eyes glinted, his smile sharpening. "Well now, ain't that a fine find? Whose room, Clarence?" Clarence hesitated, then whispered, "Miss Dubois, sir. Viviane Dubois." The crowd, now reassembled, gasped as Blanc held up the shawl, its pale blue hue catching the candlelight. Viviane, standing near a table, froze, her champagne flute slipping from her hand. "That's not mine," she said, her accent sharp, her composure cracking. "I've never seen it before." Blanc's voice was calm but relentless. "Miss Dubois, this shawl matches the thread in the hinge, seen by the fireplace where the key was hidden. You admitted to being near the pedestal, admiring the necklace. And now this, in your room. That's a mighty fine coincidence." Viviane's eyes flashed, but her voice was steady. "Coincidence, yes. Or a frame. Someone planted it, Mr. Blanc. I'm not your thief." Blanc's smile was enigmatic. "Maybe not, ma'am, but the clues are singing, and they're singing your name, unless—" He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd, lingering on each face. "Unless someone else wants to claim this shawl." The room was silent, the tension a coiled spring. Then, from the back, a new sound, a faint metallic clatter, like something small hitting the floor. Blanc's head snapped toward it, his smile fading. He strode to the spot, near the bookcase, and crouched, his fingers brushing the oak. There, glinting in the shadows, was a tiny silver locket, its clasp broken, its surface etched with a floral. pattern matching the button and crest. He held it up, his voice a quiet thunder. Well, I'll be damned. The final clue dropped right under our noses. Now who's missing a locket? The room erupted, and the truth was closer than ever. Chapter 10. The Thief Revealed. The fog outside Blackthorn Manor had woven a dense shroud by late evening, transforming the estate into a spectral island adrift in a sea of mist. The Atlantic's murmur was a faint heartbeat, barely piercing the silence that clung to the cliffs. Inside, the ballroom was a crucible of raw emotion, its chandeliers casting a fractured glow across the oak floor, as if the light itself were hesitant to reveal the truth. The silver locket, dropped near the bookcase with its broken clasp and floral pattern, had ignited a firestorm of suspicion, bringing Benoit Blanc to the edge of solving the Star of Midnight's theft. The Blackthorn family and their guests were unravelling, their facades stripped away by hours of scrutiny and fear. Blanc, with his tweed suit and piercing blue eyes, stood as the arbiter of truth, ready to weave the final thread of a tapestry that had consumed the manor. The ballroom was a gallery of shattered composure. Eleanor Blackthorn stood by the pedestal, her emerald gown creased, her silver hair a halo of authority, now tinged with vulnerability. Theodore's fists were clenched, his shirt damp with sweat, his anger a smouldering ruin. Cassandra's crimson gown gleamed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of dread, her hands clasped tightly. Beatrice, her silver chain glinting where her crescent moon, pins once hung, stood defiant, though her breath came in shallow bursts. Julian, sober but trembling, gripped a chair, his haunted stare fixed on the locket in Blanc's hand. Margaret, her grey shawl discarded, was a ghost of herself, her eyes hollow with resignation. The non-Blackthorns, Senator Grayson, Lydia, Viviane Dubois, Dr. Klein, clustered in uneasy knots, their voices silenced by the weight of the moment. The waiters, under Clarence's stern gaze, stood rigid, their faces a mask of neutrality, though Eliot's earlier testimony lingered like a shadow. Blanc held the locket aloft, its floral pattern catching the candlelight, its broken clasp a silent accusation. His satchel lay open, revealing his notebook, the tarnished key, the pale blue thread, the floral button, the silver hairpin, and the 1897 letter. A constellation of clues that had led to this reckoning. The lavender wax, the crescent moon fragment, and the pale blue shawl found in Vivian's room were the final pieces of a puzzle that had tormented the manor for hours. The thief had played a masterful game, leaving clues as taunts, but Blanc was no mere player. He was the checkmate. He lowered the locket, his southern drawl rolling like a slow tide, warm but unyielding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence, "we've reached the end of this twisted tale. The Star of Midnight's been missing for near 24 hours, and y'all are looking like you've aged a decade. But the truth's a fine tonic, and I'm about to serve it up. This locket," he held it higher, its silver glinting, "is the final clue, the last verse of a song the thief's been singing since last night. And it's got a name." The crowd leaned forward, their breath held, their eyes wide with anticipation and dread. Theodore's voice was a growl, his patience gone. "A name, Blanc. Then say it. Stop with the theatrics and tell us who stole the damn necklace." Blanc's smile was unruffled, his eyes glinting with a predator's calm. "Theatrics, Mr. Blackthorne? No, sir. This ain't a performance. It's a revelation. The thief's been writing a story, using clues like ink. The lavender wax, the pale blue thread, the crescent moon, the key, the button, the hairpin, the crest, and now this locket. Each one's a chapter, and together they point to one. Soul in this room. But before I name 'em, let's read the story one last time." He paced slowly, his loafers silent on the oak, his hands gesturing like a storyteller. It starts with the lavender wax, a smudge on the pedestal and in the library, scented with a chemical bite. Polish, maybe, or solvent. It's not a candle's leave-ins, it's a marker, a signature of intent. Then there's the pale blue thread, caught in the case's hinge, fine as gossamer, from a shawl seen by the fireplace. The crescent moon fragment, dropped to point at Miss Blackthorne, is a decoy, meant to mislead. The tarnished key, hidden in the ashes, echoes a theft from 1897, unlocking the case with a history of betrayal. The floral button, matching the Blackthorne crest, ties the crime to this family's past. The silver hairpin, bent and used to nick the hinge, is a tool turned taunt. And now this locket, with its floral pattern and broken clasp, dropped by the bookcase, a final, desperate clue. Cassandra's voice was sharp, her composure fraying. "Desperate! Mr. Blanc, you're saying the thief dropped this locket by accident, after all this planning?" Blanc's chuckle was low, almost musical. "Not an accident, Mrs. Blackthorne. A choice. The thief's been leaving clues to control the narrative, to prove they're smarter than us all. But this locket's different. It's personal, tied to the crest, to the family. It's not just a clue, it's a confession, a crack in their armour." Beatrice, her voice trembling but fierce, stepped forward. "A confession? Then who, Blanc? You keep saying it's someone in this room, but you're still pointing at me with that crescent moon nonsense. If it's not me, say it." Blanc's eyes softened, his voice gentle but firm. "Miss Blackthorne, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The crescent moon's a red herring, meant to frame you. Your pins were a convenient scapegoat, but the real clues, the wax, the thread, the key, the button, the hairpin, the locket, they're pointing elsewhere. You're clear, darling. Now let's find the real culprit." The crowd gasped, their eyes darting to Beatrice, then back to Blanc. Eleanor, her face pale, spoke up, her voice steady but strained. "Mr. Blanc, you're saying the thief framed Beatrice? Then who? The shawl was found in Ms. Dubois' room. Is she your suspect?" Blanc's eyes flicked to Viviane, who stood rigid, her black dress elegant but her smirk gone, her champagne flute shattered on the floor. "Miss Dubois," he said, his drawl deceptively casual. "That pale blue shawl in your wardrobes, a mighty fine clue. You were near the pedestal, admiring the necklace, and you saw a shawl by the fireplace. Care to explain how that fabric ended up in your room?" Viviane's eyes flashed, but her voice was steady. "I told you, Mr. Blanc, it's not mine. Someone planted it, someone who wants me to take the fall. I'm an art dealer, not a thief. I have no reason to steal a tue. Sapphire I couldn't sell." Blanc nodded, his smile cryptic. "Reason, ma'am? Oh, I reckon you've got plenty of reasons. Money, prestige, maybe a client with deep pockets." But let's say I believe you about the shawl. That leaves us with the locket, and it's singing a different tune." He held up the locket again, its floral pattern a mirror of the button and crest. "This locket's old, tied to the Blackthorn family, just like the button and the 1897 letter. It's not something you'd find in a guest's pocket. It's an heirloom, a piece of history. And it was dropped here tonight during our little reenactment. That means the thief's still playing, still in this room." Theodore's voice was a snarl. "In heirloom? Then it's one of us, someone in the family. Blanc, stop dancing around it. Name the thief." Blanc's smile was razor-sharp, his voice low but clear. "All right, Mr. Blackthorn. You want a name? Let's follow the clues to the end. The lavender wax with its chemical scent points to someone with access to the manor's polish or solvents, someone who works closely with the estate. The pale blue shawl, fine and rare, suggests a garment not easily acquired, maybe a gift or a keepsake. The tarnished key hidden in the fireplace requires knowledge of the 1897 theft, something only a family historian or obsessive scholar would know. The floral button and locket tied to the Blackthorn crest scream legacy, a grudge, a claim, a debt. And the hairpin used to tamper with the case is personal, intimate, something you'd find in a private quarters." He paused, his eyes, sweeping the crowd, lingering on each face. The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every word. Then, with a slow, deliberate step, Blanc turned to Margaret, who stood frozen near the bookcase, her navy dress crumpled, her hands trembling. "Mrs. Blackthorn," he said, his voice gentle but relentless, "you're the family historian, the keeper of the Blackthorn legacy. You know the 1897 theft better than anyone, don't you? You've studied the crests, the keys, the curses. You were near the pedestal that night, checking on the necklace as tradition. You mentioned the fireplace, saw someone buy it, but you never named 'em. And that locket." He held it closer, its floral pattern gleaming. "It's yours, isn't it? A family heirloom, passed down through the generations, broken but cherished." Margaret's eyes widened, her voice a whisper. No, that's not true. I didn't take the necklace. I wouldn't." The crowd gasped, their voices erupting in shock and accusation. Eleanor stepped forward, her face ashen. "Margaret, my sister-in-law. Mr. Blanc, that's absurd. She's devoted to this family." Blanc raised a hand, his voice calm but unyielding. "Devoted, Mrs. Blackthorn? Oh, I don't doubt it. But devotion can twist, can't it? The 1897 letter, signed E.B., warned of a curse, a shadow cast by the star of midnight. You've spent your life guarding this family's secrets, Margaret. But you've seen the cost, the fights, the greed, the pain. You told me the star's the family's heart. But what if you decided it was a poison instead? What if you took it, not for money, but to save the Blackthorns from themselves?" Margaret's hands flew to her face, her sobs breaking free. "No! I love this family! I'd never hurt them!" Blanc's eyes softened, but his voice was relentless. "Then explain the locket, ma'am. Explain the lavender wax, matching the polish you use in the library. Explain the pale blue shawl, a gift from your late husband, tucked away in Miss Dubois' room to throw us off. Explain the hairpin, found behind the curtain, matching the ones you keep in your private quarters. And explain why you knew the fireplace was the key, why you dropped this locket tonight, hoping to shift the blame one last time." The crowd was silent, their eyes locked on Margaret. Theodore's face was a mask of shock. Cassandra's hands trembled. Beatrice's breath hitched. Julian's chair creaked. Eleanor's composure cracked. Grayson muttered about scandals. Lydia clutched her shawl. Vivian's smirk faded, and Klein's notebook fell to the floor. Margaret's sobs grew louder, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. The star, it's cursed, just like the letter said. It's torn us apart. Eleanor's obsession, Theodore's debts, Cassandra's schemes, Julian's pain. I thought if it was gone, we'd be free. I used the key, the hairpin, the wax. I left the clues to make it look like a game, to keep you chasing. I hid the necklace in the library, behind the crest book. I just wanted to protect us. Blanc's smile was sad, his voice gentle. Protect, ma'am. You nearly destroyed 'em. But I understand. Grief and love make folks do desperate things. Where's the star now? Let's end this. Margaret's hands dropped, her face pale but resolute. It's still there, in the library, in a hidden compartment behind the crest book. I'm sorry. Blanc nodded, turning to Clarence. Clarence, my good man, fetch that necklace, would you? And be quick. Clarence nodded, his face ashen, and hurried to the library. The crowd stood frozen, their emotions a tangle of relief, betrayal, and shock. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Theodore's fists unclenched. Cassandra's gaze softened. Beatrice stepped toward her aunt. Julian sank back in his chair, and Margaret collapsed into a sob. Minutes later, Clarence returned, holding the Star of Midnight, a sapphire so deep it seemed to hold the night itself, its diamonds sparkling like stars. The crowd gasped, their eyes drawn to its beauty, its curse. Blanc took it, holding it aloft, his voice a quiet thunder. Here it is, folks, the heart of the Blackthorns, the source of their pain. Mrs. Blackthorn, you were right about one thing. It's a heavy burden, but stealing it wasn't the answer. He handed the necklace to Eleanor, who clutched it, her tears falling. Thank you, Mr. Blanc, she whispered. And Margaret, I'm sorry we let it come to this. Blanc tipped his fedora, his smile weary but satisfied. No need for thanks, ma'am. Just maybe lock that thing in a vault next time. Curses ain't real, but greed and grief sure are. He turned to the crowd, his voice taking on a reflective tone. This case is closed, but it's left us with a question. What's worth more, jewels or family? Y'all might want to think on that. For now, I'm taking my leave. The fog's calling, and I've got other mysteries waiting. He packed his satchel, slipping the locket, hairpin, and other clues inside, and strode toward the corridor, his loafers echoing in the silence. The Blackthorns gathered around Margaret, their voices a mix of forgiveness and pain. The guests dispersed, their faces a gallery of relief and reflection. The ballroom, once a stage for deception, was now a place of reckoning. As Blanc reached the manor's door, he paused, glancing back at the pedestal, now empty but no longer accusing. The fog swirled outside, but the truth had burned it away. He stepped into the night, his smile faint but certain, ready for the next story to unravel. The end.